meeting to order of March 6th. Let's do roll call first, down that way.
Mike Luxembourg.
Philip Jarian.
Frank Blau.
Ryan Coleman.
Cynthia Crass.
Mike Collins, congratulations to all Sounders fans. Noon on Saturday, it begins.
All right. And before we get into the agenda, I've got a couple quick comments. I'd like to quickly welcome our two new members, Cynthia and Frank. It's their first official Planning Commission meeting tonight, so welcome. And I'd also like to extend my thanks and gratitude to Mike Luxembourg for serving as chair over the past year. Put a lot of effort into this role, and I'm looking forward to following his footsteps. So, thank you. Okay. Has everybody reviewed the agenda? Is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion, agenda is approved. The minutes, did everybody get a chance to review the minutes of January 23rd? Is there a motion to approve those? Moved. Second?
Second. All
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. So now if you noticed, we've moved the director's report and review of the program calendar towards the end of the meeting. So that way we can kind of roll right into our first session of public comments. If anybody in the public is wishing to comment on any non-agenda issues this evening, you can do that. So if you've got comments on the homeless encampment or comprehensive plan process, thank you, Cameron. We'll take those comments later. So I've got two people signed up. Looks like they are interested in providing comment. General public comment now, Margarita. I'm not going to try the last name. Would you like to? Oh, okay, so for later on. And then the other is Joe McCarran.
Thank you very much. My name is Joe McCarran. I represent Broadmoor Estates Homeowners Association. I live at 24107 Northeast 29th Street. For those of you, I was here last fall talking about the density calculation pilot. For those of you who don't know where Broadmoor Estates is, we're on 244th. We're as far north as you can get, right on the Sammamish line before you hit 202. Last fall, when I presented you, we talked about the density calculation pilot. It came up and we asked that it either get, you guys do away with it or don't do the density calculation pilot, or you move it into the comprehensive plan. So the decision was made to move it into the comprehensive plan, so we thank you for that. What we've done on Tuesday, there was a council meeting which I attended. Since then, we've met with our homeowners. We've put together some recommendations and some notes on our thoughts on the R1 zoning as part of the comprehensive plan. That letter was sent to the staff. It's also sent to the council. We just presented it to the council Tuesday night. My understanding is you're not involved in that piece right now. So what I'd like to say to you is just please, if and when the R1 zoning calculation comes back to the Planning Commission, if you please keep in mind that we do have a letter on file that has our opinions and some recommendations, and please take the time to go through it before any decisions are made. So that's what I've got. I appreciate it. Any questions?
Has that memo hit our desk yet? I have not seen that.
That was back in September or October when we did that, wasn't that?
It was fall, yes. The letter from a homeowners went out last week to the council.
Oh, okay.
So it hasn't come to the Planning Commission yet?
I'll speak to that real quick. Cameron Grohl with the Community Development Department. The Commission will recall that late last year, the Council entertained some proposals to expand the scope of the comprehensive plan process that you're now working on. And we have a resolution that the Council adopted on December 10th that has a number of items, and they've asked us to come back and give them some cost and timing estimates to accomplish those additional scope items, including this R1 study that the council is interested in. We have not done that report yet. That's scheduled for March 17th. Some of the homeowners and other residents that are interested in those scope of work items are providing comment to the council directly. So the item is not yet in front of the commission. That's why you haven't seen any correspondence or any scopes of work or anything like that. It's just not ready for you. So if the council decides to add these items to the scope, they will take into account the public comment first, and then assuming that we are doing, for example, this R1 study, then we will get that scope of work from the council, and then the Planning Commission will be dealing with that directly in the coming months. But we'll see what the council says on March 17th first.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron. Okay. Is there anybody else who did not get a chance to sign up but wishes to provide public comment to the Planning Commission tonight? Okay, seeing none. The next business is homeless encampments.
Mr. Chair, as you also recall, the city of Sammamish next door at Mary Queen of Peace had Tent City 4 late last year. And they've now moved a couple of times since that time. That experience and the council's policy direction to adopt permanent regulations is the reason why we've added this item to your agenda for the next few sessions. Tonight is an introduction session. At your meeting on March 20th, we've proposed that you hold a public hearing, and then you'll be engaging in deliberations and recommendations in the meeting after that. It's a fairly high priority item for the City Council because the Council adopted in January a moratorium on new encampments. Those moratoriums are only good for 6 months, and so our challenge is to try to actually adopt new regulations before the moratorium expires. And so we've got a fairly ambitious calendar, and that's why we've squeezed it into your calendar now. Tonight, with the introduction, our project manager, Carl DeSimas, who's here. Carl, raise your hand. Carl's not only our code compliance officer, but he's also a planner, and he's working on this as a part of his other duties as assigned, part of his job description. And he's been working on gathering material to introduce the subject for you tonight. He's got a number of PowerPoint slides. You had material in your packet. A couple of commissioners have asked good follow-up questions in advance of tonight's meeting, which we appreciate. I think Carl has been in touch either by phone or planned to respond to some of those issues here in his presentation. So the goal tonight is to kind of familiarize ourselves with this issue, make sure the Commission has a good grounding in the topics, the pieces of data and research and analysis, and some of the experience of our peer jurisdictions on this subject, and ask any questions that you have. We will propose to open up your public hearing with a recommended ordinance at your next meeting, and you'll be taking public comment on that. And then you'll have an opportunity to make changes to that recommended code either that night or in subsequent sessions before you hand off your recommendation to the City Council. Then they will go through their own process of public hearings and deliberations and adoption, and we're hoping for all of that to be done by about June. So it's a pretty hurry-up kind of thing that we're working on right now. So I'll ask Carl to go through the slides. I'm pretty sure he's okay if you ask questions during the slides, or if you want to save them for when he's done, that's fine too.
So just to kind of clarify a couple things, Cameron, Carl's going to go through his presentation. At our next meeting, or with our packet for the next meeting, staff will be presenting an ordinance based on feedback and direction you got from City Council. That's what the public hearing is going to be on. That's what we'll then discuss and deliberate.
That's right, and we can take direction from the Commission tonight too if there's an interest in seeing an option or some other additional issue addressed. You're free to ask us to do a little more research or consider a change to that. You're right that we did get some policy direction from the City Council. I think that was included in your packet. The Council did talk about this subject at their recent retreat, and that's where they provided that policy direction to the Commission. So they've asked for the ordinance to have certain components. That doesn't lock the commission in, but it does give you a sense of the kinds of issues the council wants to see addressed in your recommendations. So I think it's helpful for the commission. I'll also note, Mr. Chair, for the record, we may have some people that are interested in providing public comment tonight on this issue, and that's always welcome. Staff have created an email address for this subject and a GovAlert mechanism, and so we have, I think, a small web page set up. So we're trying to make sure that we do a lot of citizen engagement in a variety of different ways. And so even in advance of the formal public hearing before the commission has typically welcomed public comment. So as you said earlier, once we're done with Carl's presentation, any questions from commissioners, you can take questions from the public, and that would be under your 7-minute rule in that case. So if that's sufficient, we'll ask Carl to come up and go through his slides.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead, Carl.
Hello, my name is Carl DeSimas. I'm the Code Compliance Officer with the City of Sammamish. Sorry?
Were you going to have that on the screen?
Or were those on the screens as well, Debbie?
Thank you.
Is it there now? Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Again, my name is Carl DeSimas. I'm the Code Compliance Officer with the City of Sammamish. I'm your point person on the temporary homeless encampment code development process that we'll be going through. I have a short presentation to go through tonight, but I wanted to start with our goals for the evening, or at least what I'd like to present as our goals. Tonight is really more of an introduction for the homeless encampment code development process. And what we really want to get out of it tonight is to get sort of an understanding from you all what information you would like to have to better inform your recommendation to City Council. So as Cameron stated, if you'd like to stop me throughout the presentation and ask questions on a particular slide, that's fine, or if you'd like to wait till the end, that's no problem as well, however you'd like to do it.
Can everybody hear Carl pretty well? I know you're kind of
Am I
tall.
not speaking directly in?
You need like about a
I
a
need
3-inch
this thing
taller mic.
up a little higher.
That's not working too well. You just prop it up as best you can.
Okay.
That's
Is that a little better there?
That's better.
Okay, I'll try and lean over a little bit. Does this look too awkward? Okay. So tonight's information, we'll be going over a background, a little bit background on homeless encampments, some of the direction that we've gotten from council, and then some information that we've been gathering over the last few weeks, and then a look at some next steps going forward. So we have some context under state law. That is RCW 3601-290. It gives religious organizations some protection to host these homeless encampments. And it essentially allows for the city to regulate time, place, and manner. And it's included in the RCW. It's also included a little bit in precedent in what other cities have done. You know, we've got a large body of work out there in other cities that have incorporated these type of regulations. So we can draw from that as well. So we're looking at the frequency, permit process, and then sort of standard requirements and authority for site-specific conditions. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. So the homeless in King County, there's the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness. They're contracted through King County. And I thought it'd be good to just throw in a little background, a few statistics related to homeless. So there's this, what they do is a one-night count. It happens in January every year. They send out volunteers, hundreds of volunteers go out around King County throughout all the jurisdictions, and they count people on the street, essentially. So folks who are unsheltered. They're either in tents or they're sleeping maybe in bushes or under door jams or whatever that may be. So those numbers, the 3,123 from 2014 is the count that they just did in January. So those 3,000 people were folks that they counted who were unsheltered. So they were not in shelters or were not in any kind of transitional housing. I was not able to find the numbers for 2013 and 2014 of those folks who were in the local programs. the numbers weren't on their website, but you can see that there's a bit of growth. It's roughly 14% from 2013 to 2014, which is a significant increase. A little history on encampments in King County. These were the first known were in the 1990s, Tent City 1 and Tent City 2. They are no longer operating, but in 2002, Tent City 3 began, and that was due to a consent decree between the City of Seattle and Share Wheel, which Share Wheel is the supporting organization for Tent City 3 and Tent City 4, Seattle Housing and Resource Effort, and the Women's Housing Equality and Enhancement League. It's a partnership between those two organizations. The Tent City 3 is currently in Shoreline at St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church. Tent City 4 is the tent city that we're more familiar with. It operates on the east side. Tent City 3 operates on the west side of the lake mostly. Tent City 4 is currently at the Faith United Methodist Church in Klahani, nearby. I visited them today. Then we also have Nicholsville, which has two encampments that have been traveling around Seattle for a number of years, since 2008. They're currently at, these are just addresses, nearby churches. Camp Unity is another one that's operating on the east side. It was established in 2012. This is a split-off organization from Tent City 4. They are not supported by Share Wheel, like Tent City 3 and Tent City 4. Camp Unity is sort of self-sustaining. They're currently located in Woodinville. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Is it making sense?
But you are fading out a little bit.
Oh, I am? Is it hard to hear me? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Just one question. The numbers, the 3,123 for 2014,
Yes.
how do those reflect to what's currently in the tent cities? Do you have those numbers also?
You mean how many residents are in each tent city?
Yeah.
I don't have that number, actually. I'm not sure. I can tell you that at Faith United Methodist, the Tent City 4 right now, they have less than 20 members or residents. And I've heard, and I don't know this for sure, but through folks that I've talked to, that Tent City 3 is full at this point. So they're at capacity, they're at 100. And that might be from the Tent City 4 and their recent mishaps with trying to find placement throughout the east side. So they may have lost some folks, and some of those people have gone over to Tent City 3. So that could be.
And do they break it down, east side, west side, when they give that 3,000 number for King County? Is there any further breakdown of that into location?
Not that I have seen.
Okay. Thank you.
So our experience in Sammamish has been with Tent City 4 at Mary Queen of Peace. And as most of you know, this was done through a temporary use permit. There were 60 days granted on October 19th, 2013. And then they were granted a 30-day extension that expired on January 17th, 2014. The City Council passed a moratorium in January of this year for 6 months on temporary encampments so that we could go through this process that we're going through currently. So what we're looking at is what we're talking about here really is developing permanent regulations. We've gotten direction from the City Council to research the experience of peer cities, to gather the stakeholder input, and then develop those regulations so that we can permit this type of a temporary land use. So we're studying the list of peer cities that you see up there, and they're also included on the table that you guys were given in your packet tonight. And I included the MRSC research because we are working closely with MRSC to help us out with this research and do fact-checking. So the topics that we're considering are in the right-hand column there. And that's not all of the topics, but those are some of the ones that we feel are going to elicit more response or, are going to need a little more researching. Is there any questions about that, about those lists? I see some little consternation.
Carl, could you just tell us what MRSC stands for?
It's a Municipal Research and Services Center. Municipal Research and Services Center. And they're a nonprofit, unaffiliated organization that cities gain membership to. And so we can access them to help us with research projects. And they post a ton of information on their website. They're really a very useful organization and a fantastic tool for this type of work.
And that's where you got this, excuse me, this packet, homeless housing date at the top, updated
Correct.
June of 2013.
Yes, and I did add the URL to the end of that as well, as I believe Commissioner Collins asked.
Thank you.
Carl, question. So among the
Yes.
topics and issues, is there a limit to the number of people? So I see that there's number of camps at once, number of camps in a given time frame, but is there a limit to the actual head count in the camps?
There can be. Many of the regulations do call that out explicitly, and some of them also use the amount of space that a site might have to limit that number. But typically, across the board, it's pretty close to 100, is fairly universal at this point.
Do the other jurisdictions report how many people they've had underneath the umbrella of the regulations in a given time period? Like if you went to Mercer Island and said, do you currently, obviously they don't currently have a tent city at this time, but when they had one, were there 100 people in it? I mean, what was their sort of relationship to the regulations at that point?
I don't know if any of the jurisdictions actually took count of that or kept any kind of records regarding that. It's a good question. That's certainly something that we could ask MRSC to look into for us, I think.
And I think with relation to that 100 number that I see sort of across on a lot of these, I'm curious if any of these, if that was ever a ceiling for people that was prohibiting them from doing more that they thought they could do, or was that just we never had even close to 50? Sort of.
Right.
I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, I see where you're going with that. I think that's a good statistic to look up. Any other questions on this slide? So we received some direction at the February retreat from the City Council. We recommended, or staff recommended, some potential policy choices that we figured we thought might come up during the decision-making process. And so I've listed them here, and many of these are also on the memo that was in your packet tonight. These also are much like the ones that you saw on the slide prior to this, just a little more detail on this one. And some of the things we're talking about here are, limiting the total sites hosting to one every year, or from limiting a particular site from hosting again after they've hosted for a period of 12 or 18 months. Proximity to transit is another one that we feel will be an important policy choice that will have to be made here. Working with the hosting encampment sponsors to ensure warrant and sex offender checks. There might be a few options here. It seems to be fairly universal across the board in how this is conducted, but it's when the checks are done will be sort of the choice that we have to make here. Is it right when the residents move in? Is it when the encampment moves into its site within the jurisdiction? Is it after members of the encampment have left for a certain number of days? Those are some of the choices and things that we have to think about there.
Could you clarify what limit total sites hosting to one site every 365 days means? I mean, I guess one of my thought was, if it's for 90 days and there's 4 potential sites in the city, is this to prevent them from just rotating between those 4 forever? Is that the intention here, or what's the effect of this?
Well, the idea behind that particular line is to limit the number of to limit the number of encampments that you could have in 1 year. So are we going to allow one encampment this year and then another encampment the next year, or are we going to allow 2 encampments this year and two encampments the following year?
So it is to say we aren't just going to have a rotating encampment between 4 sites.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Okay.
Other questions?
Maybe following on to Frank's question, how does number 2 interface with number 3 on your list here? So one says we're going to do once a year, and the other one says that limit a site that has hosted from hosting again.
Oh, so we're talking about a geographic location then. So
Yes.
limit a site that is hosted from hosting again for 12 to 18 months. So we're talking about one particular site. In number 3, we're talking about the number of encampments we would allow in a year.
I understand, but if you take the 2 together, does it say that someone who's hosted a site in year 1, can they host again in year 2? Or is this intended not to preclude that?
They could, yes, according to this.
So they could host in,
But these-
let's say it's a 90-day period. They
Okay.
host January through March 2015. And let's say the ordinance says they can't host again for another 12 months. Well, since they've already hosted January through March of 2015, there can't be another one in the city that year, and they have to wait another 12 months, so they have to wait until 2016 to host again.
That's my question.
Is that?
Correct.
Is that
Yes,
accurate?
yes, that's correct.
So
Mr.
one
Coleman.
pertains to the city overall, and one pertains to an individual site, correct?
Correct. Does that make sense, Commissioner Luxembourg?
I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
Does that make more sense, the way that's been described?
It sounds as if you can host in 2015, and then you can host again in 2016, then I don't understand the reason for number 2.
Well,
Can I suggest?
Unless it was longer than 12 months, unless it was put to
Can I-
18 months.
Can I suggest, just based on my understanding of this whole, maybe this will clarify? So let's say that you are Mary Queen of Peace, and let's say you're the neighbors of Mary Queen of Peace, and after you've had Tent City there for 90 days, and you don't necessarily want to have it be your turn again when the city is eligible to host again. So maybe a given site would be limited for 24 months, which would be most relevant to the neighbors that are nearby.
Well, I can understand the reason why we might want to do that, but I'm a little confused as to what the direction is.
so let me try one more scenario out for you before Cameron jumps in. So I see he's
Figure it
itching to
out.
do it. So another scenario, Commissioner Luxembourg, is that maybe Mary Queen of Peace hosts July through September of 2015.
Okay?
But then they want to come back and host January through March of 2016. Different
Yep.
calendar years, but only 6 months apart.
Yeah, that would make sense. I could understand that.
Do you want to take a stab at it?
At the city council retreat, we had a very similar discussion, so I think we need to work on these bullet points a little bit further to kind of clarify what the differences are between them. And I'll just say that we are talking about, this is an introduction session. You're not deliberating, you're not trying to decide on it. You are trying to understand what that direction is. I think the direction staff prepared for the council is a little too opaque, and I'll take responsibility for that. So we'll take your questions as an indicator that we need to refine these a little bit and make them more distinct between them. I do think in your questions of each other and of staff, you've hit on the various inputs that we have heard from residents and that we've seen from some of the peer cities. So it's, as Commissioner Krass explained it, we heard this from Redford Ranch, who's the neighborhood just to the south of Mary Queen of Peace. Gosh, we'd kind of like not to be the neighborhood that always has Tent City coming back next to it. So isn't it fair that if Tent City comes back to Sammamish, that another church host again before, let's say, this church hosts again? So maybe the magic number is not 12 or 18, but something like 24 or some other number, so that there is some distribution of that use not just a single site over and over again. The separate issue is, well, how often do we want to have a site in the city as a whole? And that's where the once per year idea comes in. So we'll try to clarify these better as we write the code. And if you have other ideas you'd like us to follow up on, we can do that.
I'm interested in if there's also, I think I mentioned this in a previous question, if there is a consensus as to the total number of potential sites that could host in our city, and is there any attempt to coordinate between them? So could I say, here's our 10-year plan for Tent City. 2014, it's going to be here. 2015, it's going to be here. 2016, it's going to be here. So that there is a better planning of it over a longer term, or is that not possible?
Well, it's probably a little beyond the scope of this, but staff have had the same question, and I think you'll hear from some of your public comment, maybe even tonight, about what the religious community, the host organizations are doing to try to create more of a schedule like that. I think that schedule is actually related to some of the terms that we're going to be looking at here. How long can a particular tent city stay in one location? So I think we'll hear more about that both tonight and later about the planning out process. And it starts looking at, well, how coordinated are we amongst the cities that are all going to be hosting this, not just the religious sites. Carl, I think you've been able to find 11 or 12 sort of identified churches.
I have an
and you
upcoming
have a
slide.
slide on that. So we'll talk a little bit more about what might be eligible here.
Thank you.
It might be coming up next, actually.
I'm sorry, Carl, one more thing. Yeah,
Sure.
on this slide. I think there was, when the Vice Chair and I met with you last week, there was one bullet item that council decided to not move forward. Could you clarify for us what that was?
Oh,
Because what I'd like to avoid is having a discussion we don't need to have. 'Cause,
Right.
If council's already said, we don't want to consider that, then
bear with.
I would suggest that maybe the commission not spend time on that.
Understood. Bear with me one moment here. I've got it. So this was to do with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth bullet down, and the sub-bullet for work with host encampment sponsors to ensure warrant and sex offender checks. Options to consider include, and the one that was removed was all residents, say once per month during the stay. So this would be a provision where we would require a check of a warrant check and a sex offender check once per month of every resident in the encampment.
In addition to those three other checks.
Possibly in addition to the other three, right?
Question. You mentioned, it sounded like you mentioned there were 12 potential institutions in the city that would maybe be considered to be on
12?
the universe of hosts.
12 to 13.
How many of them are not within a half mile of transit?
I don't know that right offhand. It's a good question. I don't know exactly, but we could certainly look that up. We could certainly pull it together. Commissioner Collins?
Go ahead. I think it'll be pretty obvious when you get to the slide.
Any other questions? So Share Wheel has a code of conduct that they use within their encampments, and many of the jurisdictions around the area have incorporated some of those codes of conduct into their own regulations. And so I wanted to present them here to you just to give you an idea of what those codes of conduct look like that they actually operate on with and sort of police themselves within their own encampment. In some cases where some jurisdictions only use a temporary use permit, they have incorporated many of these codes of conduct into that as a condition of approval, essentially. So many of them are fairly obvious: no drugs, no alcohol, no weapons, and actually all of them on this are fairly obvious, except for maybe the no open flames that are permitted. But this again is just just examples. But as far as their own code of conduct that they use within the encampments, this is usually true.
Does Camp Unity abide by the same regulations, or do they have their own, or are they different?
I'm not exactly sure. I couldn't speak to that. They don't have as much information out there to draw from. That's a good question. I would assume that they do, but I can certainly find that out for you as well. So this is, again, more provisions from their own code of conduct. Some of these are maybe not quite as obvious, such as the no verbal abuse, the no trespassing, no loitering. But apparently these codes of conduct work very well, and they're very diligent about policing themselves under these codes of conduct within the encampments. So here's the slide that we've been talking about here a little bit. This is some of the potential sites within the city of Sammamish. So as Commissioner Collins said, based on geographic location, it could be fairly obvious if you know where all of these sites are as far as the proximity to transit. And probably the majority of them might be outside that half to quarter mile. But again, we'd have to map that and to really get to the heart of it.
Can we request that mapping?
Is that, Carl, is that something staff can do fairly easily? I mean, mapping the church sites, but also we'll need to know like what transit routes are nearby.
Honestly, I don't know that for sure. I think that we could do that. I'm looking, yes, we can. Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Carl, question.
Yes.
So this list of sites, is this a list of potential sites in terms of these are all religious institutions, or is this a list of sites that have actually expressed interest in hosting a site?
No, these are just religious institutions. So the first is true. We don't know how many of these have expressed interest. As far as we know, Mary Queen of Peace and Good Samaritan Episcopal Church are the only two that have expressed interest. And as you know, Good Samaritan Episcopal was a potential site, and they were going through the process of possibly having Tent City 4 after Mary Queen of Peace, but they decided that it felt too rushed for them to continue on with the process, and so they walked away from it at that point.
Carl, on that map, could you also include some other landmarks, perhaps elementary schools, things like that, things that might come up of interest?
Thank you.
Sorry, one quick thing while we're on the
Sure.
distance thing.
Yeah,
I hate
no.
to go too far into the weeds, but whatever we think the regulation will be, whether it be airline distance or network distance, let's just make sure we're looking at that. So if we're talking about how far it is along the street network versus how far it is as a crow flies, let's just be consistent so we don't make a regulation for one, but we've evaluated on the other.
Any other comments along those lines? Okay, so for the past few weeks, staff has been reaching out to stakeholders who were either directly related to the Mary Queen of Peace Tent City 4 encampment, or were possibly impacted by it, or possibly had any sort of dealings with them. So our idea here was to get sort of a retrospective and just get a general idea of how people felt about it, and if there are things that, from their experience, they felt should be included in a regulation or excluded from regulations. We kind of wanted to get a sense of what those things might be, so sort of an early comment period, if you will. And so I've sort of compiled a list of some of the things that we heard, common themes. We heard quite a few things, but really I pulled out some of the common themes to present to you. Safety, obviously one of the big item that we heard over and over again, both inside and outside the camp. And a lot of people feel that developing these regulations is also not only protection for the neighborhoods around the camps, but it's also protection for the folks who are living inside the camps. Pre-application notice and meetings, that's the idea of, trying to get the word out earlier and try and get an idea of what's coming sooner so that we don't end up in that sort of fast-paced permitting process and trying to get this pushed through too quickly. Stop me if anybody has any questions about any of these as well. Security, police patrols and inspections, more process in place, more time. Again, we heard a lot about time. Proximity to transit schools services, of course. More city resource impacts, and that's regarding what sort of impacts are we going to have on for instance, first responders, permitting staff, use of the bus stops, those sorts of things. Number of encampments allowed in the city at any one time, number of times an encampment can return, so we've already touched on some of these themes. And then 10 city schedule, I think we were just talking a little bit about that and getting some kind of people were curious about having, or why there isn't some sort of a schedule in place. And that is an interesting question, and one that we've explored a little bit, and apparently there was a schedule for 10 City 4 on the east side at one point, and they would have sites sort of lined up for, maybe the next 4 sites lined up, but as it goes, there was the reason that Camp Unity came around, there was a little bit of a split between Tent City 4 and Camp Unity. And so once that split happened, it sort of threw that schedule sideways, because now you have 2 east side tent cities that are competing for limited space, and when we have the time limitations on the regulations, that adds to that limited space. Neighborhood outreach, again, that's more about the time component. More consistent leadership in the encampment. Some people felt that maybe the encampments would be better served if they had consistent leadership, whereas now they have leadership that rotates very often. Everybody sort of takes a role in these encampments and leadership, and everybody gets a chance to play different parts within their sort of mini society. And then permanent barriers for frequent sites and or temporary screening and setback requirements, which are pretty universal across the board in most of the regulations that I've read. Are there any questions about those? Commissioner Luxembourg?
This is a wide range of issues. Did you hear characterizations about whether it was a good experience at Mary Queen of Peace or a bad experience, or help us with that?
We heard both. We definitely heard, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there from people about their experiences, and some has been documented and some hasn't been documented. So we heard a little bit of both as far as a good experience and a bad experience. I don't know that it was swayed one way or the other, to be honest with you.
Could you be a little more specific about some of the things you heard? Or if you can't do it tonight, maybe you could do it for next meeting.
I could. Would you? So are you asking for a more detailed summary of the retrospective? Is that?
Particularly about what people thought, whether it was a good or a bad experience.
Carl, I appreciate Commissioner Luxembourg's questions. I'm personally, I'm not going to speak for the entire commission, I'm not interested in going down a conversation of whether it was good and bad, because I don't really think it matters much in terms of what we consider here in the regulations. But if people want to hear some more about, we're going to hear thoughts from the public, we're going to hear both sides of the story. I'm inclined to open that up earlier. Any questions? Does anybody agree, disagree? Am I out of line? Let me know.
No, I would agree, and I think that I'm also more interested in hearing some creativity around how we structure these things and people's solutions. I think it's very easy to get good and bad sentiment. And I kind of agree with Ryan that that's not really relevant to writing recommendations in this sense, but, we're also writing a comprehensive plan, and we're taking things into account about what people want, but I'm also interested in some solutions also, so that's a little more technical stuff that I'm interested in.
Okay. Anything else, Carl? Or is that it?
From this presentation?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've got more slides. Yeah, sorry. I was waiting to see if there was more. I didn't mean to look spaced out there. Okay, so we're at the point where basic process schedule. So this is what we're looking at. March 20th, staff is suggesting that the Planning Commission hold a public hearing on this topic. And then we'll have another meeting on April 3rd that would be deliberation and sort of adoption of a recommendation to be handed off to City Council on May 6th. And then we'll go into the City Council. So as Cameron stated earlier, it's a really ambitious timeline. And it is bookended, of course, though, by the July 14th moratorium expiration. And so we necessarily kind of have a tight timeline in that regard. I don't know that there's a lot of interest in trying to extend that moratorium. So, Commissioner Collins, could you?
Well, I was scratching my eyebrow, but I do have a question. Could you also explain to us what are the rights of privacy for the residents of the camp? I haven't been in one. I don't know very much about it. Are there any bloggers? What type of interaction between the community and the camp members itself happen? I mean, if it was me, I'd want absolute privacy, but I don't know if that's the expectation or not.
Are you talking about that expectation from the camp members themselves? I think it kind of goes both ways from what I've heard, and I am speaking as a layman on that as well. But I think that they do appreciate some privacy for themselves, but they also do seem to appreciate engaging in the community. And from what I heard at Mary Queen of Peace, they were very active in getting into the community and working with there's a local nonprofit that works out of Mary Queen of Peace, and I heard from them that people were coming in and helping them stuff envelopes and were very, very active in getting out into the community and meeting people. So I don't know for sure that answer.
Security and right of privacy are kind of a two-headed coin. So I want to know both sides of that a little bit.
Okay. Any questions about the schedule, Chair?
It's pretty fast.
Yeah.
We'll do. I see a council member of Alderama in the back there. We'll do what we can.
I'm just a discreet observer.
Actually, Carl, quick question. Sorry.
Yes, of course.
Worst case scenario, we're late. Moratorium expires. What are the options of? You mentioned something about extending the moratorium, right? What's just curious? What's the cost of extending it? What does it take? Is it possible?
I don't have an answer for that. Susan?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't really at that council meeting, but I understand that there isn't a lot of interest in extending it as far as wanting to get some regulations in place. It's something that I suppose we could take back to the council if we got to that point and ask if they were interested in doing so. I'd encourage us to try to meet the schedule, though, and honor that time frame if we can.
Yeah, I think the one thing that is a little bit in Commissioner Cherian's question is I'm certainly expecting a lot of public interest in this, and I expect that'll probably happen both at the commission and the council. And I could see us potentially maybe spending one more meeting on this, hopefully not more than that, but, I mean, that is something that we'll have to take into account. We've still got our comp plan work that we're doing as well, so.
Yeah, and I think there's room in the schedule, if we had to spend another meeting. So I think it's more extending it longer than that moratorium expiration that would be the issue.
Thanks, Susan.
We do, to that point, we do have a couple of fallback dates if need be, but we hope that we can keep to the schedule. I'm sure everybody hopes that we can, but it is a good point that the expectation that there will be a lot of public comment on this is probably correct, I would think.
Just a quick question on the moratorium itself. Does it preclude somebody from applying for a permit, or does it preclude a permit being approved?
We can check the actual wording, but most of the moratoriums that we do for that type of are moratorium on acceptance, processing, and issuance. So we normally would not accept an application for something that is under moratorium.
So it's not as if if July 14th happens and the regulations are there, someone's ready to move in the next day. What it is on July 15th, they could submit an application at that time. Is that?
Yeah, we can verify the wording in the moratorium, but that's the usual case, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about schedule? Okay, so just recapping a little bit of what we've talked about tonight here with the presentation. Given a little bit of context regarding homelessness in King County and 10 cities and history on the east side especially, a brief overview of the topics, and then what we've heard, a little bit about what we've heard and what we've learned so far. Anything to add to that recap, or any questions about it, Commissioners?
I've got a couple of things I want to confirm with you, but before we do that, are there any other general questions from anybody?
I have one.
Mine is on the table itself. When you produce something like this, realize some of us are pretty old, and I cannot read this first column when you print it. Okay, so if you need to get rid of the shading and make everything black, that's fine with me. I want to be able to read it. The other one I'd like to hear about next meeting is, Redmond does a lot of things that are different than every other city, but you haven't supplied any reasons as to why. And it's hard to consider Redmond at all if we don't know why they're doing all this discretionary stuff. There might be advantages to it, but we haven't seen anything yet.
So what their policy decisions were around making those discretionary?
Yeah, why?
Okay.
We should be able to learn something there.
Absolutely, that's a good point, Commissioner Collins. And I brought up my final slide here, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And one of the things that staff will be working on is we're right now compiling records from those peer jurisdictions from their code development processes, and hopefully that would shed a little bit of light on that. So we're looking at putting together a binder of those public records for you, so you'll have that as part of your deliberation process. And so hopefully that will get to the point of what you're speaking to, Commissioner Collins.
If possible, if you could do a recap of those. I mean, I assume those binders are fairly thick.
They may be, that's right. So in summary is what you're asking for?
Yes.
I was just going to comment, if I could, to your question about Redmond. If I'm reading this correctly, is it because Redmond doesn't have specific code for temporary encampments?
I don't know.
Yeah, that's what it looks like in the column. So maybe these different parameters are based on Redmond's temporary use permits?
Correct. Many of the jurisdictions will have some specific language regarding homeless encampment under temporary use rather than a code section entitled homeless encampment or temporary encampment or something of that nature. So, but Redmond does leave a lot to discretion, so that they can do it on sort of a site-by-site and case-by-case basis a little bit more as far as the site development goes.
But as an example, even the one that's 23 20-foot setback, that's pretty reasonable. That's discretionary. Does that mean they get to go down to 0?
I'm not exactly sure if they default to the underlying zoning. I don't know that for sure.
And what benefits and hindrances do they have?
It's just a comment that when the code offers some discretion on the part of the city, it doesn't mean that the applicant can simply elect to do whatever they like. It means that, often means that the city staff have some discretion if all they can reach is 18 feet to allow an 18-foot to be sufficient, or if 30 feet is really actually necessary, rather than the 20-foot standard because of a specific situation, to require more. So the discretion with guidance is actually a good tool where people can use their judgment and not be so rigidly held to an exact measurement. You just want to make sure that you've got good guidance to go along with the discretionary authority. So it doesn't give the applicant free rein, and it asks the city staff to employ good judgment based on the circumstances in the permit process. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thank you.
And I have a related one, actually. The difference between discretionary and non-specified.
In Redmond's code, they actually, at the end of the code section, they explicitly call out a few items that are left up to the discretion, so that they can add them in as a permit condition, for
It
instance.
seems like Issaquah has a tendency to not specify things, and I'm not sure why that's different than just discretionary. Is it just because that's
Issaquah actually doesn't have they don't have a temporary use, or sorry, they don't have a homeless encampment section even within their temporary use guidance.
Okay.
So I think they use a special use permit for these, so they don't have any language at all.
Okay, thank you.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, discretionary is discretionary on behalf of the staff. So the planning director has the ability to do the right thing in that situation. So it's not discretionary for the homeless people or their organization.
That's correct. It's from the permitting side, correct.
Anybody else? Anything?
More questions?
Just a couple things, Carl. So couple of the things we asked for, timing-related questions. That sounds like something staff's going to kind of work on, the once per calendar year versus every 12 months, kind of clear that up. And then there was some question here about the potential facilities that could serve these, where are they located, and their proximity to transit. Did I leave anything off? Does that sound okay? So those are a couple follow-up things for you. So I know we've got, on the agenda, we've got public comments after the comp plan process, but I'm curious if the commission would entertain taking comment on this. No.
I think you should. I would say, given the full agenda tonight, you usually have 7 minutes, but I would ask people, you don't need to take the whole 7 minutes, and so it'd be great if we can get those comments in writing or summarized for the commission. There'll be at least one more opportunity for the commission, and then an opportunity at the city council's stage as well. So you don't have to use all your time and get everything in now. There's other opportunities.
So the first person we had, is there a separate list for that up there, Cameron?
I believe there is.
We also had Margarita Zabolskaya. Close? All right. Would you like? Sure. Thank you. And if you could please give us your name and your address, that'd be great.
Yes, my name is Margarita Zabolotskaya. Address 24310 Northeast 16th Place. I'm actually a neighbor to one of the churches listed in that 12 or how many church list. We are neighbors. How to explain? Our property ends in about where the door is, and after that the church parking starts. That's how close the church is, right? And the proposed encampment, and it was Good Samaritan Church, the proposed encampment would be actually closer to us than the library to here. So we're talking about, and I mean, literally we would see it like that. So naturally that comes as a big concern for us with respect of security. And I understand that there was a code of conduct there, and we've been on the meeting and we met those people, and to be honest, it doesn't even matter if it's homeless or not. Any adult encampment for 60+ people living for 90 days, that close, in that wide open, because we almost have no trees, the parking really comes close to us, that is a very big concern to us. And I know that out of that code of conduct, many items on it were violated, and we know it because they were published in the newspaper and other places, like people were trespassing, people were arguing loud and all that. So being that close to us, it's a huge concern. So one of the things that I was really hoping to get on the list is the proximity of the encampment to the actual resident, to the house. And if it's a wide open like ours, when we have no fence, we have a wetlands very close to us. In fact, I think in our neighbor's house, they even have wetlands on their property. There is a stream going from there, so we cannot really put a good fence there because it would be right in the middle of that stream. So we keep it open, and it's fine for a church parking. But if we have in current events like that, that would be just a big problem for us. So that's one thing. Another thing, we are in a forest. It's a wildlife. We have bears. We have everything, right? We send emails each other saying, oh, I saw a bear on the parking lot. Careful, right? If the encampment has an open kitchen and the toilets and everything so close to us, that imposes other concern to us as the actual environmental concern. Rodents and other things, you know, if the food is in wide open, we know that they try to get to our garbage cans, so we keep those clean all the time. That is another concern. Another thing is that in case if the encampment still happens close to us, and we have bad experience, and we call police and we call others, is there anything that would regulate the future, so return of that camp back to the same site, right? If it's good experience, in one thing, but if we have it every year and we complain 1 year, is there anything that would stop it from coming back if it wasn't good, right? So I didn't see that on any of the slides that we have so far. And moreover, on the meeting that was kind of quietly distributed in that church, when I finally made it, thanks to my neighbor who sent us like, it's coming, I hear my echo. On that meeting, when we said that, is there any permits that you have to apply for? The answer from the church was that, yeah, but it really doesn't matter because it's not mandatory. Well, we have a right to do it anyway. So my question is that, do they really have the right to do it anyway? Or this permit, if denied, means that no, they cannot do it? Because they pretty much went back to their rights of doing it, right? So that's about it.
All right. Any questions? I would encourage you to follow up with staff about the question of what a property owner could do if they apply for a permit but don't get it. I think they can help you with that answer.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I have a list of others that have signed up. Most have noted no, they don't want to give comments. So the next one that seems to indicate was John O'Brien.
I misread that. I thought it was about the handouts and the comments.
Oh, okay.
I'm Sean O'Brien.
Okay, sure. And again, just give your name and your address when you come up, please.
Hello. My name is Sean O'Brien. My residence is in Kirkland, but my family runs the Arbor Schools, and the address there is 1107 228th Avenue, Southeast. I can see I left my light on in the office. I wanted to just speak a little bit about my experience with 10 City 4, being that we were neighbors with Mary Queen of Peace Church. As you can imagine, with that very short time frame that we were given to understand that this was happening, we had parents on both sides of the fence wanting to go and serve meals to the homeless, as well as threatening to pull their children from our private school. In addition to that, we had tours scheduled during this time frame that 10 City moved in, and we had tours canceled to our business because of the homeless camp. And I've submitted that to Cameron, I believe. I'm kind of nervous standing up here. So what we did at our school is we hired a private security guard to beef up, to appease the parents that were nervous, and to ensure that we share a parking lot with the church, and we wanted to make sure that our female employees were able to come to the school in the middle of the winter, in the dark, at 7:30 in the morning. So we had a full-time security guard from 7 o'clock in the morning to 6:30 at night, half an hour before anybody showed up and after they came. Our security guard, Jorge, while doing his rounds, developed a relationship with the residents of 10 City 4. Within 2 months, within a month and a half of their stay, he was offered stolen merchandise, mostly small electronics such as car chargers and car accessories, things like that. He was offered drugs. He was told where in the camp to purchase drugs, and things of that nature. Really upset. In the middle of December, so I believe that the code of conduct that the 10 City put forth is really important. My question is, how is that enforced? Because it's my understanding that it was not enforced strictly, and the evidence to that is that in the middle of December, I believe it was the 18th, I was approached by one of the Sammamish police officers, Officer Darnell, and I was brought over for a meeting with 10 City 4, and I learned about a sting operation that led to that arrest that everyone is aware of, which I believe happened on January 14th. That is just about a month of police activity. That shows that they were not enforcing their code of conduct to me. If the police are going through the effort to have an undercover operation going on, that there's something that's leading them to do that, and they obviously arrested those gentlemen for the sale of methamphetamines. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that their code of conduct was poorly enforced, and I think that there needs to be regulations put in place to have leadership. We talked about leadership of the 10 City, and there's clearly a lack of that. And those were the points I wanted to make this evening. Thank you for your time. I have handouts. Can I pass them out to you directly?
You can give them to Debbie, please. Any questions for Sean?
I would love to answer a question. It was quite an experience for me.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. If there's anybody else that would like to comment, please come up, give us your name and address.
Thank you. We kind of put that, we put our names in kind of a reverse order there. I'm John O'Brien, one of the owners of the property at Arbor School. Mary O'Brien is here as well. She's the founding director of Arbor, and Sean is now the head of the school. He did summarize what happened with the security guard to an extent. I wanted to say that we do have 180 kids up there, 300 parents, and we had quite a public meeting of our own during that time period, which is with the 11-day notice that we had. In addition to the offer of the sale of the drugs and where to get drugs, Jorge, they befriended him because he was of Mexican descent. He had a sunshine tattoo on his cheek and more tattoos going on his shoulder, so they felt like he was one of them. And they smoked crack cocaine on the bench between the parking lot and the library here. And he watched them drink alcohol before they got into the camp, because there was no drugs allowed in the camp. That information is what was used for the sting to create the arrest of 2 individuals for selling methamphetamine. And they said they didn't have any more product left, and this is in the newspapers, that he didn't have any product left because he sold it to 12 other members in the camp. And if you say 50 to 60 people over there, that's about 25% of the members of the camp. But we don't just want to do the anecdotal stories. We ask for solutions. And in the handout that we have, I have summarized at least 4 sections that we'd like to see in a proposed ordinance. Under the state statute, you're going to learn that you have the right to impose restrictions on these camps based on public safety and public health, and you can have insurance requirements as well. Now, I'm not sure why these peer jurisdictions were limited just to the east side. There are 13 cities that have these ordinances statewide, so this is a brand new issue for everybody. But if you look at, on page, the second page of this handout, I won't go through everything line by line, but Spokane and Lacey both have restrictions on how close these camps can be to schools. Spokane has a 750-foot setback, and Lacey has a 300-foot setback. And I took the language out of the Lacey ordinance, and I'm proposing that Sammamish have a restriction of 1,000 feet from a school. I don't think these camps have any business being next to a school. The other comments that I'd like to make is regarding the security force. We paid $250 a day for this Jorge Jimenez to be patrolling our property. The internal security force that they talk about did not work, period. And at the council meeting, I believe Ben Uzizi said, well, if they're having so much trouble over there, so we submitted a log that you have in front of you from Mr. Jimenez of what he experienced. And Ben said, well, if they're having so much trouble, why don't they call the police? The day after the moratorium was extended, Jorge found the crack pipe. I've got 3 minutes and 31 seconds left. Thank God for little apples, huh? Jorge found a crack pipe and paraphernalia in the bushes, and we called the police. And what happens, we have a squad car coming into the school parking lot right when the parents are dropping off their kids, and already they're quite on edge, and here we have a squad car coming to the school. So we're suggesting that an independent security force be required if they're going to have these encampments, because we don't want to pay for it. We think the church should pay for it. Now I'm surprised about the line item was taken off the agenda about the background checks. To only require these people to have the background check when they're coming in is not going to work. And there is an anecdotal story of a Tacoma man that raped a 6-year-old child in Tacoma, fled Tacoma, and went to the Redmond Tent City 4 just before they moved here. Now, when he went to the front door, there was no warrant for his arrest because they didn't have time to process it in Tacoma. He was in the camp for 2 weeks before they found out that he had a warrant for his arrest. So what we're asking is not only do you have a background check when they come in, but we want periodic background checks to continue while they're in there, and we're suggesting bi-weekly. I think there might be a suggestion for 4 days. Within the state statute, again, you'll see that you can require insurance for these camps. Now, in that state statute, it says that cities are immune from liability if they grant a permit. So someone that has a claim has no recourse against the city. In the contract between the church and Tent City 4, it said that Tent City 4 will hold the church harmless from any claims. So if somebody came in with a criminal background, or if there was drug abuse, and this drug-crazed individual or the felon comes and assaults somebody next door, where do you go for recourse? You don't sue the city, you don't sue the church, you sue the Tent City 4 encampment with no liability insurance. So we're asking that you also require insurance as part of your ordinance. And the last point that we added to our letter is routine and random drug screening. I don't think there's any constitutional right for these people not to be screened and tested once they're in there. And again, as we have experienced over 25% of the individuals in there were using methamphetamines. We think that's a fair exchange if they're going to be residing within the city limits, that they should be required to do some drug testing as well. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you very much.
My name is Elizabeth Maupin. I live at 410 Mount Jupiter Drive in Issaquah, and I coordinate the Issaquah-Sammamish Interfaith Coalition. I have some experience with tent cities and ordinances, and thought I might be able to answer some of your questions. On the one-night count, it is a count done in limited geographic areas. They repeat the count in the same area from year to year. It does not count every municipality in the county. So it's a count for the purposes of comparison. It doesn't give us total numbers. So bear that in mind. There is a breakdown. You can find it on the website of the Seattle-King County Coalition on Homelessness or something like that, SKCCH. Limiting to a particular site, and you talked about the total number of potential sites in the city. That's a really good question. On that list that you saw, the ones on the right side, I've either spoken to and they are not able to host, or in some cases like Spirit of Peace and the Muslim Association, they don't own property, and it would have to be on property owned by a religious congregation. So you really, I haven't asked all the ones in the left-hand column, but it's a much smaller pool than you might think. There was something called East Side Cares, which did plan rotations with Tent City 4. Their leadership had a family emergency of an extended nature, and the group fell apart. I've been trying to get it back together. Cher is not really interested right now. Camp Unity is. So we're trying to figure out how we can do rotations. The thing that I would particularly like you to look at is, you've just been looking at East Side, mostly East Side municipalities. What's happened over time is that the King County ordinance on encampments was passed in 2005 and is going to be rewritten this year. The Bellevue consent decree came along in 2006. A lot of the restrictions on time and frequency and duration come out of the Bellevue consent decree, people copying that. Issaquah's rules came out in 2007, Mercer Island in 2010. Later in 2010, a state law was passed, and that state law has been referred to previously. It kind of limits you to restricting the church's hosting or religious communities hosting the sites to measures that have to do with public health and public safety. In 2011, Seattle wrote an ordinance which is in compliance with that 2010 state law. I would highly recommend that you look at the Seattle ordinance rather than the hodgepodge of East Side ordinances, because you want an ordinance that will last and that is in compliance with state law and will be hopefully in compliance with King County when they get their act together later this year. So I would be happy to send you electronically copies of the Seattle ordinance, if that would be helpful to you, and copies of the state law. And if you have other questions, I'd be glad to come back. And I'm really sorry that Tent City 4 didn't abide by its code. The code for Camp Unity is about the same. I will try to find out from their recent hosts how well they have kept it. But remember that when you are creating this, it's for homeless encampments, not specifically Tent City 4. Thank you.
Is there anybody else that would like to?
Sign up, but if I could.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, please.
My name's Rebecca Sumrall. I live at 24306 Northeast 16th Place. I wasn't preparing to speak tonight, so I'm a little disheveled, but I just wanted to, Margarita here is my neighbor, and I wanted to add on to some of her comments. Understand that RCW allows for these encampments, the churches to host these encampments, but we are concerned as parents primarily of our children's safety. And the fact that it appears, according to the press, I should say, there were 8 arrests that have resulted at Mary Queen of Peace. And then it's my understanding there were at least 8 other arrests at their prior stay at Redwood Church in Redmond. That's 16 arrests for a group of 60 to 100 people over a 6-month period of time. And that is concerning to us. You know, it's one thing when you go to a church and worship there and you provide meals to people. It's something very different when you sleep next to them, especially as Margarita said, where we don't have a barrier, we don't have fencing. For those neighbors, it is a burden, and we realize there's something we can do about it, but we would like to ask you as the City Council, with the City Council and the Planning Commission, to at least consider alternatives in helping to protect the public safety, such as this gentleman mentioned, private security. And of course, I don't think that should be at the cost of taxpayers or community members, but if the church chooses to host them, then I think they should also bear the cost. So again, public safety with RCW. The other thing is RCW does say that you are allowed to, it's my understanding, enact guidelines and regulations that are consistent with current zoning. And it's my understanding that the temporary use permit is currently for 60 days. And I ask that if that is the current zoning process of 60 days, that you consider only allowing the encampments to stay 60 days. Because when, again, if you're talking about 90 days a year, possibly, that is 25% of the year. These, again, neighboring communities, business owners, may be forced to deal with a situation that they had no idea would ever present themselves. So, again, consistent with the zoning, I just ask about you to consider that. The other thing is to consider the fact that, you know, there should be a permanent barrier as opposed to an exposed barrier. Some areas, if it's just wide open, I just don't think a little temporary 6-foot screen is sufficient for separation. So I'd also like you to consider that. And then it's also my understanding that some areas like Bellevue have require environmental studies like a SEPA review. I'm not very sure of that. But if these camps are going to be located in environmentally sensitive areas near wetlands, that also be considered. Finally, the one thing I also ask is when these public hearings are held and public notice is given, and hopefully meetings will be held with nearby schools, that accurate information about the crime is reported. And I guess, I don't know, I assume that the chief of police is collecting information such as number of arrests and such, and that the residents are allowed to know, yes, there were 16 arrests in 6 months, as opposed to being told, oh, there's no significant increase in crime. So again, just not only public notice, but also accurate information is provided to residents. I think that's it. Thanks.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay. I'd like to see if there's a show of hands of anybody else. Okay, I think that's maybe.
My
that's
name
it.
is Mary O'Brien, round out the family there, and I am the founding director of Arbor School 1107-228. And it's not a crime to be homeless. I want that out there. You know, but for the grace of God, go I. But the deal is that I'm in the business of protecting children. The city is in the business of protecting children. Parents are in the business of protecting children. And it is our priority, it's our right as parents to determine when we are going to expose our children to the harsh realities of life. And our school got the opportunity to give that lesson to these children without our consent, because a lot of what went on at the camp was down, but in order for these people to get to public transit, if the people were expelled, if the people were using the drugs that weren't allowed in the school, they were doing it between, and we don't have a permanent barrier, we have a 6-foot chain link fence. We got to see what was going on. We got to explain to the children what was going on. This isn't something that just happens in a vacuum. This happens to children. We have children at that school that are from infants. We have 18-month-olds. We have 3-year-olds. We have 6-year-olds, and we have 13-year-olds. They all experience this differently. And it's our job to protect them. A lot of these ordinances, virtually all of the ordinances, have a setback from schools, a setback from childcare. Maybe it's okay. You listed Eastside Catholic as one of the religious organizations. Perhaps at the high school level, they also have a middle school. Perhaps they do want to expose the children. And I'm in for, maybe a junior high student should go experience being out on the street. I know private schools that do that. I don't think that we as a city, we as a community, have the right to tell the parent of a 3-year-old, tell the parent of a 5-year-old, that they get to watch what it's like to be homeless, and then send them home to have mommy and daddy explain that. After mommy and daddy have been at work all day and they're trying to get dinner on the table, and the kid's going, why was it? Is that really what the city is allowed to do? Or is that something that is the parent's prerogative? You have the ability to put a security barrier around the children of Sammamish, and that's what we ask. Put up a barrier. 700 feet, 1,000 feet, different jurisdictions use different lengths. Give the parents of the city of Sammamish the right to raise the children the way they choose to, and let them choose when they're going to explain to their children the harsh realities of life. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just a few minutes before 8. We've probably got about another hour left. Unless there are objections, I'd like to suggest maybe just a, let me clarify before I do that. Anybody else want to provide public comment? Okay, go back to my other train of thought. Short break?
Please.
5 minutes?
Please.
All right, we're on break for 5. Thank you. Could I have the planning commissioners please return? Thank you.
Doesn't sound like your mic's on.
Should I yell? Let's go. Let's go, guys.
Gavel does work.
A little bit. Need a head. It needs to be heavier.
Can it be louder?
Filled with a little shot.
A gong. A gong. I like it.
Debbie might have turned our mics off.
Good.
See, I told you she has all the power.
I don't know. It doesn't sound like this is on either. Is it? Is it on?
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I think it's on.
It's on? Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's working.
Yeah, there it is.
We're on.
All right. So now we're coming back to our work session on sustainability.
Correct. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Emily Arteche, Senior Planner with the City of Sammamish, and we're here today to continue our discussion on sustainability. You received an additional item in your packet as of Friday, which identifies some additional optional transportation sustainability framework goals and policies. Those would be in addition to the ones that were identified in the Joe Tovar memo that went out in your packet. So we're here today to provide you some additional information about that, answer some questions. We have a PowerPoint presentation which bridges the two memos together in a way that we can continue to follow. So you should have at your desks a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. If you could bring that out. When we go through the PowerPoint, you can look at the slides yourself and make notations. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Joe Tovar up to the podium so he can lead you through the PowerPoint discussion.
Thanks, Emily. Good evening, everyone. The last time I was here in January talking about this, we used the sustainability strategy as sort of our point of departure. And we were, as you may recall, sort of sorting and batching goals and policies out of that strategy into how they might fit into the comprehensive plan. One thing I think I mentioned this in the cover memo, that unlike the parks chapter and unlike the shoreline chapter, which is very difficult to touch without going through a whole more process, the sustainability strategy is something you can use as a point of departure for changes or for additions. So there were some comments, for example, I saw some emails from some of the commissioners. Commissioner Kraft made the point, some of these things that are in the memo and recommended policies were sort of outside what was mentioned in the sustainability strategy, and that's because the strategy wasn't really written as a comprehensive plan document. It was written as a different kind of an animal. So I guess I wanted to give you license to be thinking that you're not bound by the words that were in the sustainability strategy. Consider it to be a resource. If something doesn't quite fit, it doesn't need to. You can change it. So tonight, we're going to talk about where sustainability would live in the plan, how we propose to structure that. We're going to go through the sustainability framework goals that you've got in the PowerPoint as well as in the memos you've received. We'll talk about the additions, the rationale for some of them. Touch on some of the comments that some of the commissioners have offered already, questions I think that were raised. And then we're going to go through each of these sustainability framework goals and policies. We're going to ask you to sort of give thumbs up, thumbs down, or let's leave it in for now. If you think something needs to be edited, we appreciate if you would give us some direction as to how you might want to see it edited, but we're not going to try to wordsmith tonight. We would go off, come back with language that tries to get at the direction you give us. Which means we're not going to try and finish this necessarily tonight, given the hour. We'll try to get through all of the proposed goals and policies, get your sense of, are these keepers? Are these things we can drop, don't need to continue? Are these things we need to edit in some way? Again, this is a graphic we had last time, the definition of sustainability and sustainable development. And it's something I think we even talked about at the Vision workshops back last month, where sustainability has three different components: the environment, the economy, and the society. This is an attempt to graphically show you where in the emerging chapters this discussion of sustainability would occur. Now, we really haven't talked much so far about what would be an introductory chapter. As you know, the current plan has 2 introductory chapters, and we think at the end of this whole process, we'll know what needs to live in that introductory chapter. But
For starters, we know in your existing introductory chapters, you have the discussion of vision. So wherever the vision discussion winds up, this is probably where it will be housed. There's a profile of the community that's useful to talk about. How does this relate to state law, regional policies? How is this plan implemented? Other things you think are important to have in that introductory chapter, we'll come back to. But I'm only showing you this to make the point. The sustainability framework goals that we're talking about tonight would live in that front chapter. Then individual policies you see arranged across the different subchapters here would be sustainability policies that are attempting to move forward, clarify, implement the framework goals. Now, we talked last time about not wanting to be redundant, say the same policy again and again. Some of these policies might have application in more than one chapter, but I think our sense of this is it's good to try to identify where that seems to be the best fit, most germane place for that policy to live. And if it's determined that it would be useful in some other chapter to make reference back to a policy, let's say in the land use chapter from the transportation chapter, we certainly would have the ability to do that. Now you notice for shoreline, there's no listing there of sustainability policies, and that's because the Shoreline Master Program, adopted by separate ordinance, is a state process. For you to touch it would take a whole nother round of notice, hearings, Department of Ecology review, and approval. There's a lot of sustainability thinking, I think, in most Shoreline Master Programs, because I think a lot of those concepts are inherent in the Shoreline Management Act. But we're not going to be trying to craft policies to fit into that particular chapter of the comprehensive plan. To try and keep track of where do these recommended goals and policies come from, using some color coding here. If it's blue, it's something that came from the sustainability strategy or the economic development strategy. If it's green, it came either from the memo that was sent to you in the packet for tonight, or the memo I think that Emily sent to you with some more thinking about transportation policies you might want to consider. So first up, sustainability framework goals that come from either the strategy or the economic development strategy are listed here. You've seen these before. You've seen SFG 1 through 4. SFG 5 actually is from the discussion that's taken place by the city on the economic development strategy. This is something you could either decide tonight, yes, it looks like we want to incorporate it in some way, keep it as a framework goal in the plan, or we could wait until we got to the discussion of the economic development chapter, which is coming up in a number of months. So first of all, I guess what I'd like is, if I can get just a head nod, these look good, or if somebody wants to take exception to one of these framework goals or ask a question about it, that might be the best way to move through this in a timely fashion. Does that sound acceptable?
Yeah.
Okay, these are not new. You've seen these before. Any comments, any concerns, suggestions about these 5?
I have one question.
Sir.
So far. On number 3, it says conserve water and protect water quality.
Mm-hmm.
Is it within our purview in this comprehensive plan to discuss air quality also, or is that outside the scope of a comprehensive plan in this case?
Well, I think it's, I
know it's different agencies probably,
Yeah.
but I'm just curious how that fits into this.
Well, I think it's fair game. It's a good question. If you look at the goals of the Growth Management Act, and this is all to be a document that implements the Growth Management Act and shows how you've considered the goals in your adoption of this document, air quality is one of the things that's mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to have us compose a framework goal that talks about, or you could even add air quality to goal 3, we could figure out how to format that. But it provides the rationale, provides a goal rationale for many things that other policies are going to call for, like more compact development, alternative forms of transit, more tree cover potentially to sequester carbon. So there are things that can be traced back to that as a core concept. If you want to catch that as a goal, we can do that.
Yeah, it just seemed missing to me. It's like, okay, the water, okay, what else do you need to live? You need air. So I would like to have air quality added.
Could I ask the question then, could we come up with an SFG 5, talk about air quality and bring that back to you when we come back with the next iteration of this? Does that sound like something the commission would like us to draft?
Yeah, I don't think it fits directly into 3. I don't want to
I
shoehorn
think
it
you're
in
right.
there. I would like to see some slightly different language around it, but I would like to see it called out. I don't know if there's consensus on that.
Okay. Yeah. We'll bring it back a goal.
I'm not seeing anybody nod or shake their head. So,
Thank you. Now, some additional framework goals that were listed in the memo that came in the packet. This was as a result of basically the staff and the consultant looking at the literature. What do other places do when they talk about sustainability goals? And these are from different cities, not just in the region. Some of these are other parts of the country, where they've tried to articulate what's sort of a high rank order organizing concept, high rank order goal that would deal with these different issues. For example, SFG 6 talks about an ecosystem, and I know last time you were talking about, can we talk in a policy document about the things that matter to us? Yes, the trees, but what about the ravines? Well, how about the lakes? How about the water courses? What about the flora, the fauna? Well, there was also concern not to sort of string cite those things and leave something out. Ecosystem is a pretty global way of describing basically the relationship of all these things, and in fact, it's a word that appears in the statute. The duty to designate critical areas and protect them is a duty that goes to ecosystems, and it names that word specifically as something you're concerned about. So that's why I think SFG 6 dovetails nicely with that direction in the statute and really kind of gets at, in a more shorthand way, the many subsets you were talking about last time. So that's the rationale for number 6. Number 7, let me just sort of scroll through these and stop me if you want to ask a question or make a comment. Number 7, there was also a lot of discussion at previous meetings about the character of the place and the nature of the place, the history of the place, and there are a lot of trees here. I know trees and regulation of trees is something that's coming up as an issue that you'll be dealing with in the near term. But when you get to, well, what is it you're trying to achieve here? Part of it, I think, and others have said this, is the appearance, the number of trees visible in landscape, how it characterizes the community as a place where trees matter, trees exist. There are other reasons for caring about trees and habitat reasons and carbon sequestration and other kinds of things. But this would be a goal that would talk about the aesthetics of the trees is something that's a high rank order goal.
As long as we capture both of those as goals, I'm okay. I'm not very comfortable with just forested appearance, because I guess my response to that would be if you drive out, some highways and as a private plane pilot, I've also flown over those highways. It's a very different experience when you see clear cuts, 10 feet off the road, and driving down the road, you would never notice that. You would think it was a forested appearance, but it's not. So I think maintain a forest presence in the community rather than just a forested appearance would be my preference about that language.
So some alternative word to appearance. Other thoughts about that?
Yeah,
suggestions?
I had similar. It was more of a the wording didn't quite fit with me, but I like Frank's thinking a little bit. Mike, you had?
I had a question back on number 6, if I could.
Sure.
When we talk about supporting a variety of wildlife, I'm not sure what I think about this yet, but the question that I had is that all the wildlife that we have today, or is it only a subset? What was the thinking behind the language?
Well, I think the thinking in the critical areas, as an example, going back to that as our parallel, is to what have you got now? Not let's reach back and bring back a Pliny woodpecker that was here 80 years ago, or mastodon. This is not going back in time. It's no net loss of the ecosystem as it exists today. So I think present tense would be my intent in how you would want to read this.
It seems like number 6, if that's the intent, doesn't say that. That'd be my point.
How about maintain the existing ecosystem?
That would say.
Take it closer? Okay.
Now, we could argue about whether that's right or wrong, but I'm just trying to understand what the intent was.
Yeah, it's not a retroactive, pre-European settlement ecosystem we're talking about, although some do.
Is that would number 6 also, just to your point there, to be a place to include the word diverse, a rich and diverse ecosystem, because it's like rich, you could debate whether or not something made your ecosystem richer or not, but diverse actually has ecological meaning.
Right.
It's a scientific term, and I think I'd rather hang on that than rich myself.
Okay. Well, let's propose diverse as an alternative to rich, and we'll come back to that one as well.
Well, Joe, they're not mutually exclusive terms, so I think that I like Commissioner Luxembourg's point. I think that we should definitely have diverse also, but there's no reason why we can't have rich and diverse, correct?
Okay. Sure.
And I also like Commissioner Blau's point about the appearance, forested appearance. You're absolutely right. You can drive down roads and see trees maybe 4 or 5 deep and not realize that it's clear cut after that. So maybe character or some word that maintains the why we like Sammamish, which is it's very forested to begin with.
Right. Forested character maybe is a better word to get at some of what you're describing. Later on, we'll talk about a policy. There are a few policies that talk about things like when development is occurring, seek to maintain as much tree cover as possible. There's also another potential policy you could adopt, which we'll get to shortly, that talks about finding out what is your existing canopy, what percentage of the total city has trees on it, and do you want to establish a benchmark and have some kind of policy saying over time we'd like not to lose that. Some places actually set targets of increasing it over time. But this is the big global goal framework for thinking about those detailed policies later. Okay, number 8, encourage sustainable development of both public and private lands through the use of green building techniques, low-impact stormwater practices, and green infrastructure. Green building techniques are things like LEED, things like, I think, zero housing was discussed as another possibility. There are different ways that you can come up with building techniques that are require less use of resources and energy. Low-impact stormwater practices, low-impact development, and green infrastructure frequently means applying low-impact development techniques to public projects, things like rain gardens and pervious materials for surfacing.
Do we need to put quotes around the word green? I know it's sort of a term of art right now.
Mhm.
What?
As opposed to painting everything green?
Someone could take us very literally and we'd be in trouble.
I understand what it means now.
Yeah.
I don't know, does anybody else feel the same, or?
I would prefer environmentally sensitive.
Or sustainable.
Yes, I agree that green is a loaded,
Okay.
ambiguous term.
Okay. Again, there'll be a policy later on that talks about what might that mean. Things like natural systems, mechanical systems that mimic natural systems in public infrastructure. So environmentally sensitive might be a term we'll come back at you with.
Looking at 8 and 9, I don't have actually a problem with the word encourage or the word promote, but maybe it would be a good idea to understand what the difference between the two words is. Or do they mean the same thing?
I don't know that, I think there's a very indistinguishable shade of difference between the two. Part of our challenge here is we're trying to use verbs that suggest movement, that suggest moving in some direction to achieve something. At the same time, as we get down to the policies, I know there'll be discussion about, are some of those verbs too directive? Do they look like work program mandates, which I know we want to try to avoid?
Well, if 8 and 9 are intended to be the same thing, then we ought to use the same word, because otherwise we're going to confuse ourselves, because theoretically, at some later time, when they say different things, there must be a difference. And so I'm not sure if there's a difference, but you understand my point?
Yes, I do.
One thing I don't see that I don't know whether that fits into more of a vision or even one of these sustainability framework goals is a recognition that we're operating under a context of global warming, and that we're operating under a context of what the water supply is going to be 20 years from now, and what the climate's going to be 20 years from now. I know we don't know these things with any certainty specifically, but I don't see anything in here that says that, like people could say, if you asked this 50 years ago, people would go, well, there's always going to be trees. When people moved to Washington State in the 1800s, they just took down all the trees because they figured there'd always be more trees, and that's just not true. And I think that I would like to see in our guidance here, the reason we want to do sustainability is because they are finite resources, and finite resources that are less because of things like global warming. I don't know how that gets folded into this, but I think that that's an important distinction here that should be guiding us in a plan like this.
I'd like to hear more from others too, but.
Yeah, that kind of feels like a little bit of an introductory sort of.
Okay. As long as it's there somewhere, I would like to see it. Yeah, I think that's just. I just feel that it hasn't been acknowledged yet. It's the elephant in the room for all these conversations. Why be sustainable? Well, because X, Y, and Z is happening.
There's a little bit of an entree we could get to with that on the first page of my memo at the bottom of the page, under the discussion of sustainability, which is kind of the narrative. It's not the goal, but the narrative explaining what this is. At the end of that, it says, it means leaving a legacy for future generations, the community, the region, and the planet. Maybe that's a little bit too peripheral. and you're talking about climate change, you're talking about global warming. And if that's what you mean to say, we should talk about, do you want to say that? I mean, do we need to say more here, if that's really the point you want to make?
How does the rest of, if you look at that paragraph, if you look at the first sentence, that sort of says it all, and then you have several additional sentences, and I got a little confused about the additional sentences, because I got confused particularly about whether we're talking about sustaining what we have or trying to restore what we had in the past. And I read some of that into this language, but I don't know that that was the intention.
Well, I know the word legacy, you made reference to that one of your email asking a question. Are we trying to create an additional duty beyond just keeping what we have? I think legacy, I was using as a shorthand way of saying, one of the concepts with sustainability is you're looking multi-generationally at what's going to happen 2 or 3 generations from now. And will those people 3 generations from now look back at this generation and say, good job? To me, that's the legacy I was trying to invoke here. If you want to just drop the whole last sentence, managing community growth and development, I think it still works, because the earlier part of the paragraph makes the point. You're trying to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I do think it's a good idea to leave the narrative in that talks about the 3 pieces, the economic, the environmental, the social equity piece.
I don't have a problem with that. I guess my point would be, leaving a legacy could mean many things to many people, and maybe that might be confusing.
Again, I don't have a strong feeling that it needs to be in here for this to work. If it's an issue that you want to take out, we certainly could do that.
I'm not really sold on taking it out, but I think I agree with Mike that it needs to be what kind of legacy we're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Just leaving a legacy feels to me like, there's some pretty bad legacies out there too. I think we need to say something about like a positive environmental community legacy for these generations.
Okay.
Needs to get back to what you were talking about here.
Right.
Recognizing
Recognizing that things, the externalities that are going to come to bear on those generations, we are attempting to mitigate.
I think we're really getting into wordsmithing.
Yeah,
here,
I'm
and
sorry. I agree.
I don't think we want to go that route. I'm more interested in what our policies are, and what are we really going to accomplish. I mean, how we frame it and how we pretty it up, I mean, that's great, but let's get to the policies, because the policy's going to come back and drive everything else.
I would definitely agree, Mike. I think, this first piece, and Frank, I think you raised a great question, but this first piece to me kind of feels a little bit like a foreword, and sometimes you have to write the book first, and then come back and write the foreword.
Exactly. We may be coming back to these goals after you finish your discussion of policies.
I'm going to disagree. Philosophically, I agree, but what that means is that if goals are not important, we don't need them, because if only the policies count. I could understand that, and we could do it that way, but if we're going to have goals, then we have to understand what they are, and they have to make sense.
I'll give you an example. We're talking about wildlife and everything. I mean, one of the best programs we have to encourage that is Backyard Habitat Program. I mean, there's only so much you can do that's going to really affect wildlife. If you're going to go, let's leave a legacy of wildlife or whatever, that's great, but there's only so much you can really do as a planning commission and as a city. You're gonna have to, what is the policy? It tells you.
I don't disagree with that, but if we're going to have goals, then they have to be meaningful, because the goal establishes the framework to have the policies. And what I'm hearing is you're saying it doesn't matter what the goals are.
No, I'm saying that once you do the policy, you're almost always going to come back, and there's no sense spending a lot of time on wordsmithing right now.
Right.
I think you're both right. This is an iterative process. Throw the goal out first, then you do the policies. The policies seem to talk about things the goals don't address. You revisit the goals, or you tweak them somehow. So I think we can
spend so much time on the goals is I think what we're saying.
Yeah, this is
I
the last-
recognize they're there as a framework for the things we're talking about, and yes, we're going to talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the point is we need to get down to some of the policy stuff, and then when we're done with that, come back and say, do we need to tweak the goals based on what we learned in the policy discussions?
There you go.
Agreed.
Okay. Looking at number 9 here, we talked about human health last time, and this was an attempt, I think this might have been Santa Monica, they talk about environmental and human health. As both, they're being related, they're related concepts. And if the planet's not doing well, we're not going to do well. We can do well at the expense of the planet. This is trying to say we need a culture that respects both and tries to reinforce both through education, potentially city demonstration projects and programs. That would be public education. So that's number 9. Number 10, again, I heard this in spades at the visioning discussion, was the notion of inclusive citizen involvement. Chairman.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question about number 9. Are we leaving something out of our toolbox for promoting environmental and human health, like regulations and standards? Or does that go there?
Policies. Maybe even just the word policies in there would help. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's our biggest hammer, actually.
Is
Well-
that on point, Joe, or is that?
No, I think it is. I think, there's sometimes a risk at too many string sites, having too many boxcars behind the engine, you're pulling things. I think you could, though, insert policy and after projects, public policy and programs. So public policy then provides direction to capital projects as well as programs and regulations. But the notion of culture here is not just, this isn't just living in the documents of the city and how the city conducts its business. You're trying to have the public as a whole embrace these concepts and help bring them about through how they conduct their business during their lives.
Just a quick question about when we use human health in there, I remember from the early conversations, there was some, I don't want to say controversy, but some discussion about whether or not that belonged in a comprehensive plan as a more significant element, kind of like what we're doing with sustainability. Public health could be applied across a broad variety of things in a comprehensive plan. I like having it in there as a tool that we can craft policy around because I think it's an important perspective. But is that a common thing to have in these plans?
It's becoming more the case. Back in, when was Julia here? Was here in December, talking about this very subject, and the fact she did some work for Pierce County Health Department talking about how you can incorporate human health considerations into comprehensive plans, regulations, programs. So I think the short answer is yes.
Okay.
If you would like to talk about it more explicitly here, perhaps we could come back with a separate framework goal that talks about human health as opposed to just environmental health. I'd like us to show you something like that next time.
I'd be interested. I don't want a huge thing, but I would like a couple of bullet points on it to see if it feels to me like sustainability in that regard, that it applies across a broad spectrum. So maybe we can just address it very simply with a number of framework goals and not go too far with it.
Okay. We can bring you back something to look at next time. Okay, and the final one here, number 10, inclusive citizen involvement, really kind of gets to the notion of fair access, equal access. Everybody is invited, everybody has an opportunity, everybody has a right to be involved in the decisions that the city makes. So that's the third E that sometimes we haven't talked much about. Are we good? Okay, on to 2 additional framework goals that I think stem from a discussion of transportation. Number 11 there talks about reducing energy consumption and emissions, meaning greenhouse gas emissions related to mobility. And number 12, reduce the physical infrastructure needed for mobility.
Do you have a question on that?
I just wanted to, there's a lot of meat behind those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 words, and I just wonder if that is well understood. And I mean, that to me is a huge part of how you build a community that's all these other things, is by building a compact community. So I wanted to know what other people, both on the commission and the staff and consultants, it seems as loaded to everyone else as it does to me. I mean, it seems like everything could kind of hinge on that. Am I?
You're talking about the policy statement about complete, compact, connected?
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about the policy statement later on?
This number 12.
Oh,
And I'll kind of add on to that. I read that and I went, so does that mean we want to remove roads or we just want to pave less road? Because it's, some of that, you know, the first part I would say, I don't think we necessarily want to remove roads unless it's a really good thing. I could understand wanting to pave less roads or narrower roads. Or I'm trying to understand what reduce the physical infrastructure.
I think to get to what Commissioner Kraus was saying, I think it could mean a lot of things. It could mean make growth more compact, so you don't need as much infrastructure to serve it. It could mean taking existing roads, and there's this concept called the road diet now, with narrowing things down to being just what's necessary. It could mean LID stormwater infrastructure as opposed to build the stormwater. It could mean a lot of different things, and I think that's what you were getting to. That is a very, could be a very all-encompassing goal, which, you know, it's a framework goal, so in a sense it should be all-encompassing. But it is,
I just didn't want to blow past it because I actually am very supportive of this goal and what it means to me, but I didn't want to blow past it because it's so simple and see if there was not a common understanding of what that means.
And it's because my reaction kind of took me down the road of, are we actually removing improvements that are in place today? I was kind of thinking, and I don't want to wordsmith, but are we trying to say limit the additional physical infrastructure needed? Because I'm thinking, again, future thinking, reduce is like an action I'm going to take now. I'm going to reduce something right now. But in the future, I'm going to limit what we have to build to serve our community.
My question's a little more specific. Do we really want to include needed for mobility? I mean, there's a whole bunch more of Sammamish life than just moving. I mean, it can be everyday things.
I think what Joe was saying is this would be in the transportation.
Right, these two would be transportation element.
We could have something very similar in some of the other elements. I think that's valid.
Yeah, let me suggest we come back to this one because there are a number of policies that I think Victor had in mind when he suggested these goals. So it'll be more clear, I think, when we look at the policies.
I just wonder why it says reduce as opposed to promote reduction. That would be more in keeping with the other policies that we've seen. I realize other people have written them, so.
Well, I think you're raising a good generic question is what active verbs do we use? And you raised earlier the question is promote and encourage the same thing. I think it's hard to find a distinction between those two. I think when you're talking about a goal, I think it's okay to reach beyond what you can actually reach. So I think an active verb like reduce is probably okay in a goal because that's what you're trying to get to. You may never get there, but that's what you're trying to reach. Policy, on the other hand, is more directive. It's an objective or it's an action you're saying you'll undertake. I think active verbs like reduce, we need to be very careful when we get to policies. That's where I think words like promote, encourage, strive, things that are more, we're trying to do this, we're trying to serve this goal because this goal is pretty aspirational and it's kind of out there. So I'm not as uncomfortable with a directive verb like reduce in a goal as I would be when we start talking about the policies.
Fair enough.
Okay, we have the wind at our backs, so we're on to policies now. You ready? Now, you've seen all these. These are straight out of the memo that was sent. These are derived from what you saw back in January, so there really shouldn't be anything new or different here. If there's some language here that doesn't quite work or that you think is a little problematic, as I said earlier, we have license to change this. We wouldn't be changing the strategy. It is what it is. But this is the land use element of the comprehensive plan that we're talking about. So if you find a word that doesn't seem to fit, if you could think of a word that maybe is unclear. For example, do you want to have conservation of potable water used in alignment with standards adopted by the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District? Is that too specific? Deborah thinks it is. But again, some of this is straight out of that strategy.
Specific, and I'm not sure if we had someone from the Sammamish Plateau Water and Sewer District here, that I don't know what they would say to that. Like, what do you want us to do? You know, like, where are you going to go with that? And I know we had some discussions at the previous meeting about, you know, potable water and things like that. So I understand there's even some loaded areas around it, but I'd like to know what does that really do those belong together as a policy?
I think I would agree with Deborah. You could stop that after the word operations, period.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in?
I'm sorry, I can't sit on it long enough. They're actually going the other way. Instead of reducing consumption, they're going for baseline rates and de-emphasizing usage. So, I mean, I don't think we want to be in direct conflict with policy between the water district and ourselves.
And I don't think it would if we just said.
Eliminate the name, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Take them out of
Okay.
it, so they're not.
Correct.
Yeah, take them out of the equation.
Right.
Okay, a lot of the rest of this, I think, as you've seen before, I don't see a big issue with any of these. Some of these things like the use regulatory tools to protect habitat, you're required by state law to do that.
Are there any other questions on these four? Okay.
Okay. Transportation, again, we've talked about some goals. Here are some of the specific policies that were in the draft that we sent you in my memo. Number 4 and number 5 look to me to be very much work program directive kinds of policies. So I think we would nominate those for either deletion or some kind of modification with a verb. The city is going to update the trail, bikeway, and path master plan. You don't need a policy to tell you to do that. It's in the work program. Number 5, complete the public works standards to include as many complete streets components as possible. And number 3 also talks about complete streets. I know there was a question in one of the commissioner emails about what is a complete street. I can give you the definition of it, but the question is, do you want to list it in a policy statement or not?
Is there some alternative, so I was in some of those, I remember some of those complete streets conversations. I'm wondering if there's a more agnostic term to say appropriately developed streets as opposed to, because complete streets now means something, it has a very specific meaning.
It's a defined term.
It's a defined term, and I don't think there's not consensus in either the community or even on the council, I think, that we want complete streets everywhere. And I don't know that, but I'm assuming there isn't, because it is contentious.
And it kind of, to me, these two, in my mind anyway, conflict with the framework goal we got stuck on before, which was reduce physical infrastructure.
Yeah, because complete streets certainly aren't a reduction of physical infrastructure.
If you were to drop these 2, or even 3, 4, and 5, there are some other recommended policies later on that we'll talk more about. What are you trying to get at? Ostensibly, people use complete streets as shorthand for increasing non-motorized options, increasing walkability. Those are the things you're trying to serve, but it doesn't necessarily apply the notion of complete streets to every street in town.
Yeah, it feels like complete streets is almost like, and I know it's not intentional, but it feels like something's being snuck in a little bit to try and, that has an agenda, and I don't think that we want that our policies to be that way. I think we want to say, promote the best possible streets, not complete streets, because that means something.
I also wonder maybe if another thing we're trying to say is, it's not just all about cars. So I don't know if we want to just talk about, I mean, that's really what a complete street is getting at, right? Is it accessibility for, it's multimodal. Right. So I don't know if there's some other way to capture it. I do also think complete streets, I mean, I'm all for multimodal, but my understanding of complete streets is it's not entirely static in terms of where it sits in the planning theory and what people think of it. So I hate to be locked into something that's a little, it's not that static to begin
Okay.
with.
I think you've got some policy statements coming up that will do what I think you're hoping to do, avoid bringing in maybe other people's concept of what they think complete streets means, then might not be the more flexible way you're talking about dealing with it.
If
Suggestion?
we want to just flip forward to those.
Let's flip forward. Let's take a pin in 3, 4, and 5 and come back to them. Okay. Because if we jump down to, start with transportation, we're going to go out of sequence here, get down to M.
Mike, did you want to?
Well, let's see where this goes, because it may reach the same point.
Okay.
Ms. L?
NO and P.
Okay. NO and P, these are the transportation policies that I think get better at the values, the priorities that you're talking about. Non-motorized access to transit, non-motorized access to recreation, non-motorized access to goods and services. that when people talk about complete streets, frequently, this is what they're talking about, but here you're just saying explicitly what you're about, rather than saying complete streets, whatever that means. Does this get closer?
I'm much more comfortable with this than I am complete streets.
Okay.
It just feels.
Yeah,
more
I agree with that. I wanted to raise another type of question that's related, and that is, in some other places I have seen, this assumes that all of the walkability and everything is related to the street. But some places have trails where you can walk from your house to the grocery store, but you don't have to go on a street. Now, we might not have that today, but is that something that we might be interested in at least looking at, or having something in one of these goals so that that would be considered?
To make sure that we're talking about more than just the sidewalk at the back of the curb in a street. You're talking about trails through parks, trails.
Yeah. So in a more walkable city, you're not limited to streets, or you might not be limited to streets.
It seems what we could do is kind of craft another policy for you to consider that talks specifically about walkability, talks about alternative ways of walking around, which could be sidewalk, could be trails, could be, walkways through private properties. Commercial districts have to have some way getting across the parking lot to the front of the store. It's all part of the network that I think is what I understand you're trying to get at. We could come back with something, I think, that captures that.
Yeah, I think we should, because one of the other, so I think in the 3, 4, and 5, one of those was update the parks, open space, and trail plan. And right when you said we're going to stick a pin on that. But yeah, I think discussion about trails.
And didn't you, if I remember correctly, in one of your original presentations, talk about the walkability index and sort of where that comes from and then how we score so low on it? I mean, so wouldn't the goal be to increase the walkability index and then all these other things feed into that?
That dovetails with complete, compact, and connected. Connected walking is part of how you connect to transit and services.
It's a way of measuring it too. I mean, we talked before about these goals. What good are the goals if you can't measure them, And I think walkability index is becoming a more accepted way to evaluate whether or not you have walkability, and I'd like to see that plugged in somewhere.
Again, we can craft a policy, bring it back. Okay, so now we're back to the transportation element discussion. We're dropping 4 and 5. We're coming back with, or 3, 4, and 5, we're coming back with something to capture the trail component, the walkability component, the alternatives, including the other policies we jumped back at a little while ago, the non-motorized prioritization, the transit and goods
and 4 and 5 are
services.
just being pulled off because they're actually tasks that just need to be assigned to someone, and they don't really belong here in the first place?
Right.
And 3.
And I think that update the 2004 Trail Bikeway and Path Master Plan in a way to show, emphasizing trails as a transportation option and getting a complete network is really the policy support for that action.
This feels a little bit should be further down.
Right. On to housing. Now, again, these are policies, so maybe promote reduction of energy is a better lead-in for that sentence than simply reduce. Encourage pesticide-free neighborhoods, promote conservation. And again, we might want to think about, do you want the phrase in alignment with yada yada, or just promote conservation?
It seems to me if we made the change to the, was it a goal before? Yeah.
It's consistent.
We might make it consistent here as well.
And to what Michael said earlier is that that's actually not consistent with what the water and sewer people are or the Plateau Water and Sewer District is doing. So I'd rather just not involve them in the controversy in the first place.
Okay. Does the notion of changing reduce to either encourage or promote, whichever we land on, is the preferred modifier, rather than just reduce energy? Otherwise, look okay? Tell me if I'm going too fast.
I think Deborah needs to copy the change for number 1.
What are we changing that to? Using promote or encourage?
Encourage reduction of energy used. Encourage pesticide-free. I mean, I prefer encourage. Promote sounds a little Madison Avenue.
It's a little thin, actually, in my opinion.
Which one?
Encourage pesticide-free friendly neighborhood. I mean, I
What
think we
is
should.
the word
Okay, you
friendly
think
is-
promote's more directive?
I mean, I kind of want something a little bit bigger
Okay.
hammer than that, but.
Pesticide-free friendly neighborhoods. The friendly, does that really belong there?
No.
Yeah, friendly doesn't belong there, actually.
Well, let's take it out. Pesticide-free neighborhoods. And again, I'm hearing promote is a little better verb in your mind, a little more starch than just encourage.
I don't have a feeling about it.
Yeah, I guess the other word in there that, and again, we're not supposed to be wordsmith, but neighborhoods, I mean, what about parks? You know, it's like encourage pesticide-friendly practices through a program of.
That would be under the parks element. I think.
Yeah, yeah. But I just feel like pesticide-free neighborhoods, I mean, it's not horrible.
Well, again, we're in the housing element, so we're telling people who are homeowners, renters, or buyers, please don't use pesticides to manage your lawn.
I mean, another option would be to move this over to the environment element and call it pesticide-free.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Well, that's an interesting point. Are we better off to have things in the individual elements, or are we better off to have them at higher levels? It's a function of what's going to happen later and what's going to make it easier to implement.
I think that's the case where we come back and do a sweep through, like you were saying, after we've already gotten down to the weeds, come back and do a sweep through on some of these and say that fits and that doesn't, you know.
My biggest thing on C is we really didn't touch on clustering or density at all. And I think those are going to be the number one and number two issues that can make a difference on housing element.
I think that'll probably come up outside of the sustainability discussion.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You think you're talking about context-sensitive development?
I like that.
Okay. So here we're, again, final call, we're going with promote rather than encourage.
That's fine.
Thinking about it now, promote does sound a little bit more active, promote something as opposed to passively, well, we'll encourage it if you ask our opinion.
Okay.
Okay, these are draft housing element policies I think you already saw when you did housing last year. These seem to be generally talking about sustainability, energy efficiency and housing choices, supporting nonprofits, partnerships, housing authorities.
We're good?
Oh, e-homes, right. It's okay?
Okay. Next.
Environment. Become certified, again, this is right out of the strategy, so if become certified is looks a little too presumptuous, we could talk about
Promote the goals.
promote
of-
certification or seek certification.
Promote the goals of community wildlife habitat.
Support. Deborah suggests perhaps support certification.
That works.
Certification.
Oh, we're already certified.
Yeah.
Okay. Maintain certification.
You know what, I would not be opposed to maintain being in there.
Okay.
Because it's certainly something you could slip out of, you know.
Right.
Well, as new houses come on board,
Yeah.
I mean, the program should still increase.
Could we say maintain and encourage?
I think we just need maintain.
Why wouldn't we need both?
I-
Maintain and encourage? Because
Yeah.
maintain implies
new
that
homes
Fair
aren't
enough.
you
here yet.
continue it.
Yeah.
Encourage maintenance.
Yeah.
So maintenance, I think, is a stronger.
Now let's, sorry. I'm
Okay.
falling in my own.
And then number 2 says, increase awareness about that certification so that it can succeed,
Yeah.
and expand.
Exactly.
I think
That
the direction
duplicative?
of maintain certification is
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear maintain being the verb of choice. Okay, number 3, use existing regulatory tools. Again, this might sound like a little directive verb for a policy, but this is a state mandate. You have to use regulatory tools to protect habitat and ecosystems. Ready for economic development? Support, inspire, support, and continue to promote. So no sharp edges there in the action verbs, but are these the ideas you want to have in the economic development element?
We got the word green in there again, too, and I think if we're going to change it to environmentally sensitive elsewhere, I would encourage it to be pervasive, a little less subjective word.
Yeah. What I don't know is if green business program is actually a term of art that the chamber's already using. I'd have to look into that.
If it's not, I think your point's well taken.
Number one, though, also. has been,
Buy local?
uh,
Or green community business? Yeah. Okay, we'll have to check in to see if those are actual programs with specific meaning. If they're not, I think we can come back with language a little bit more.
Yeah, down below in 3,
Generic.
you have it all in caps that implies there is something called that, so.
Yeah.
So
If it
I
is-
had written in my notes I had several notes written on this slide, and one was, has the Chamber of Commerce proposed a green business program? We're saying we're going to support efforts to implement, where are we
on
they
this
on
now?
this today?
Yeah.
Does such a thing exist to support?
Okay. We'll do that homework, and if it is existing, and if these are terms of art that are already in play, we'll talk about maintain and support. If they're not, perhaps we could look at promote or encourage. Promote, encourages.
And then
vanish.
another thing I didn't see in here, which ties into some of that, the innovation between local food producers and restaurants. I'd like to see community-sponsored, supported agriculture also, where you have, family farms delivering, boxes to you, CSAs. I'd like to see CSAs promoted as part of this also.
I thought we had something on that.
You might have it somewhere deeper in there, but I didn't see it in this top level.
Okay. Well, I think I can come back with a recommended policy to kind of capture that.
And I think number 4 is outstanding, to continue to promote and partner with the seasonal farmers market. It's outstanding.
Okay. Anything else on these 4?
No. So it's just about 9 o'clock, folks. I think we've got quite a bit more to go through. How much more time is everyone good for tonight?
Hard stop.
One of the things we did say that we'd have public comment. Are we done with that, or do you want to open that up?
No, we still have public comment, we still have Cameron's report to go through, so trying to gauge about how much more time we're all energized.
Yeah, 6 more slides. Again, I think if you raise the blade on the lawnmower, we probably can cover quite a bit of ground in 10 minutes.
Can we do that?
It's okay with me.
I'll try, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so let's try and,
Whiz through it.
yeah,
Okay.
high level.
High-level blowing.
comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't
Thanks
like
for
the
the
word is.
reminder.
This is for the Parks and Open Space
turn it-
element. Actually, somebody made the comment earlier, perhaps this should be something that we would recommend to the Parks Commission, that they take up as part of their periodic updating of the PROS plan, rather than import it into the Parks and Open Space component or element of the comprehensive plan. We want to be respectful of the fact that, again, there's a separate process, adopted by ordinance, there's a way to amend it, and in fact, I think they're in the process now of updating it. Oh, okay. But they will at some point be updating the PROS plan. It's okay with you to ship this off to them for their parking lot?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cap facilities. Again, these are straight out of the strategy. Increase efficiency of city infrastructure. I think there was a question from one of the commissioners about LED luminaires. So what are those? Do we want to talk about that specific technology in a policy statement?
I think the
mentioned
question
complete
is about whether or not that's too directive.
Yeah.
Any concerns about that? I think it's specific. I'm not sure that LED luminaires are necessarily the right application everywhere.
Yeah, it sounds like that's like a
Exactly.
little too specific.
Yeah.
Frankly,
It also has a complete
are you
streets.
concerned about complete streets on this one, too?
Yeah, and also the water and
Yeah.
the water and sewer district stuff should be probably struck from there
Yeah.
too.
Let me suggest striking number 1 completely and grabbing the city infrastructure phraseology and inserting it into 2. So we're talking about reducing energy use by city infrastructure, building and operations.
Sure.
And then number 3, the comment was made, stop after the word
Percentage.
consumption.
Where did that
Yeah.
1% annually come from? And is that a realistic, is that a stretch goal? Is that something that we think we can do, or where did that come from?
I'm looking at the staff.
It did used to be a goal
It did used to be a goal
for Sammamish Sewer and Water, 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't. It may, since it talks about San Platte Water Sewer District, it may relate back to their
Is this another one where we say encourage conservation in city operations of, something?
As opposed to reduce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, encourage conservation of potable water consumption in city operations, period. Okay. Number 4, this is sort of take stock of inventory appliances and fixtures in our facilities and replace them with more efficient alternatives, including the reuse of gray water or rainwater.
Good stuff. Okay.
Now, these are land use policies. This is, I think, potential.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Additional land use
Joe, can you
policies.
just go back to the previous one?
Yes, sir.
Previous slide. So number 4, I just want to make sure, so when we say replace with more efficient alternatives, that we're not directing that for example, like, let's replace all the lights in this room with more efficient light fixtures. I think a more sensible economic thing to do would be, as they go out, make sure you replace them with something that's efficient. So is that too specific here?
Well, some of what you're talking about might be phasing replacement as the
Exactly.
economic life of a facility comes up.
That's the word you're looking. I think we're looking for an attrition-based plan as opposed to a wholesale.
How about a phased strategic
Right.
replacement?
But isn't that directing people how to do it as opposed to setting the goal? I'm getting confused because we seem to be inconsistent.
Well, we're in policies now. This
Yeah.
isn't the goal. So we're trying to say, we will do these things. Or we intend to do these things. We intend to inventory the appliances and fixtures in city facilities. We intend to phase or in a strategic way replace them with more efficient alternatives over time. Now, you could drop the including the reuse of rainwater if that's a little bit too much language, but the sentiment is here, inventory what you got, as you have the opportunity, replace it with more efficient equipment.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I would be okay with taking out including the use of reuse because it's like that's a little
Narrows
too
it back
easy for
down.
this.
Yeah.
Or encourage intelligent management of facilities. I mean,
Okay, I think we got that one. Now, this is one I think that Commissioner Kraft's commented on in an email. Promote a land use pattern that is compact, complete, and connected in order to minimize expenditure of fossil fuels in both internal and external mobility. So this talks about greenhouse gas emissions, specifically planetary health. My question is this a high enough rank order concept to even make a goal? Because it's a pretty central organizing concept for a lot of stuff. You know, where's the residential, where's the commercial, where are your centers, how are they served, how much land do they consume, how do people get to them, move around? So a lot of these things fit together, the mobility discussion and the walkability discussion with what are they walking to, what are they trying to get to, and something other than just a single occupancy vehicle. So land use pattern is the key idea here.
Would you put in after expenditure of fossil fuels within our community as opposed to in both in external and internal mobility? Or even just say, promote a land use pattern that is compact, complete, and connected in order to minimize the expenditure of fossil fuels.
Period.
Period.
Yeah. It's cleaner.
Yeah.
I think it still works.
Well, it's also to reduce infrastructure costs, so you sort of snuck a goal into the policy. If you're going to stick a goal in the policy, because you said by saying 2, then you're kind of hinting at the goal, and it seems like the reducing of fossil fuels is part of the goal. The other is reducing infrastructure costs and increasing accessibility and all these other things. So I hate to start hitting at a goal and then stop there.
So you think we need more on a goal,
No,
or
I'm just saying that,
we need to say more here?
no, this is a few different things. One, I guess what I'm saying is that by continuing the sentence to say in order to, you're hitting at the goal, but you're only
All right.
getting at part of the goal, which is fossil fuel reduction, but there are other goals
other
that are
goals
also
also.
central to that. So it's either all in or all out, I guess, maybe. It's kind of weird. It seems weird that there's just one of the things that really is a goal, but
So you'd be comfortable even with promote a land use pattern that is compact, complete, and connected?
because that's the
Period.
policy, because it says at the top of the slide that we're talking about policies, and you.
Right. So you would stop it after the word connected, period.
I mean, to me, I like it. It's less of a sustainability policy and kind of a
broader.
good, well-rounded, broader policy, which is fine.
I agree with
I
that.
see what you're saying, is it, if you put the in order to, now it's related to sustainability. Without that, it's not really related to sustainability, it belongs somewhere
It's
else.
just good planning practice.
Yeah.
Well, again, we're in the land use element. We could just have this in the land use element without really labeling it as a sustainability policy. It has that.
That's fine.
I just, my main comment that I made in the email is I just think this is it's a central theme, and I just wanted to make sure it got the attention it deserved. And I'm not very, I look to you to help figure out where things belong.
Yeah, I think this is a big high rank order organizing concept for land use, and if it winds up in the land use element, which I think it will, I think it ought to be LU1, a very high level organizing concept for a lot of other policies that will follow. Whether we call it a sustainability policy or not explicitly, I don't think matters. I think it serves some of the sustainability objectives, but.
Is everybody okay with ending it after connected?
Moving it to the beginning of the land use chapter.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay, and policy B here talks about back to trees. And how do you maximize tree retention? And one of the ways that you do that is when development occurs, you try to maximize tree retention. So this is a policy statement. It doesn't say how much, doesn't say how big a trees, doesn't say how much development. It just says trees matter. We should try to retain as many of them as we can when development occurs. And you get to wrestle with the details of what does the regulation say specifically.
I don't think retaining is good enough. I think we should take a look at being able to promote returning trees to other areas. I don't think retaining is enough. I mean, give away free trees and ask them to be planted. I mean, there should be a little bit more than that, just retention.
Maximize tree canopy, maximize, something where it's not just the retention, I agree.
Don't know. He can come up with words later.
Well, something that implies we're not just always going to be shaving it down.
Well, the place to do that would be in policy D, where you talk about maintain no net loss of canopy. If you want to say, we want to have a bigger canopy over time, this is the place where you would say that. And then the question of how much is another discussion, but here you're saying we just don't want to, no net loss be our benchmark, or our target, if that's what you want to say. Okay, Cameron has something you might want to add here.
You're going to be tackling tree retention codes after you're done with homeless encampments. So we'll have a chance to actually match the policies and the regulations up within the same calendar year, which is actually what GMA intends, which is great. The council has expressed an interest in replanting as well as retention. So I think that might be another word you might want to weave into the policies here, because it gets at both the retention idea and the additional trees to be added in, maybe to replace trees that were taken out in the past, or trees that must be taken out as part of development now, so that we're trying to essentially get something more treed, not less, looking forward. So I think staff, if I see a lot of head nodding, we can take that and modify the policies accordingly, if that makes sense. Also trying to keep your mower blade high and keep you going.
Okay. Let's see, so were we on the previous page? Stormwater, promote sustainable stormwater. Again, this is following on a goal earlier that talks about healthy habitat, healthy. Okay, we just talked about D, sustainable economic vitality, encouraging public, private, nonprofit sectors to incorporate environmental responsibility into their practices. Parks policy, again, we might want to ship this off to the parking lot for the Parks Commission to consider when they redo the parks pros plan. We good with this one? Getting close. I think they wanted us to come back with some language that talks about actually increasing over time the canopy. But to do that, you got to know what do you have. So you've got to benchmark it.
And not just a benchmark, but a periodic
Monitor over time.
Yeah,
Make sure.
assessment.
And if the other places have monitor over time in 5-year increments, look at the canopy.
Yeah.
And if you're losing canopy, you need to think about, do we need to do other things? And then you can have that discussion, what those other things are.
Can't do that without the data.
Okay. That's D, E, and F. G, we talked about. H, we're shipping off to the Parks Commission. This is the, what is green infrastructure? Really, it's using natural systems in projects whenever you can to mimic ecological processes. This is the rain gardens, this is the bioswales, kinds of things. Incorporate consideration of physical health and well-being into decisions about the location, design, and operation of public facilities. And public facilities could be buildings, it could be parks, it could be streets, it could be anything that's a public facility, capital facility. This policy says think about physical health and well-being when you make those decisions. Support alternative fuel vehicles that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We want to spell out greenhouse gas emissions. And support transit service.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Almost done here. Preferential treatment at intersection corridors to make transit competitive with single occupancy vehicle. We'd want to spell that out too. Single occupancy vehicle travel. Prioritize, and we've talked about these before, non-motorized access to transit, access to recreation, and access to local goods and services. Is there a queue? Yes, there's a queue. Transportation demand management programs.
Hang on a second.
Can I go back?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about O a little bit. It's not just recreation. I think the biggest one we have to prioritize is kids getting to schools. So destinations are really important, and schools are the number one destination.
Would you say then education, recreation, and transit? I mean, let's loop them into one?
They can come up with the words.
Yeah.
Okay, add education, recreation, and whatever else. Okay, on to Q and R. Transportation demand management programs. Try to encourage people to find some other way to get around. Transportation efficient land use planning. Mentioned name here of walking and biking distances. Other land use choices to reduce the number and length of vehicle trips. This might be a little bit wordy. We might want to spend some time seeing if we can boil it down and make it a little clearer. I didn't draft this one, so.
Yeah.
That's why it might be a little wordy.
I have a question on Q, a question and kind of a comment. Are there other levels where transportation demand management is applied beyond commercial and residential?
Well, a place where it would be very effective if it worked would be high schools. When they get out into the real world, many of them will encounter TDMs where they work. But not many school districts have really taken this on as an educational mission.
Because we allow them to pave big parking lots.
Right, so if you wanted to have that conversation with a school district, this would be a place to start that discussion by saying, this matters to us.
Yeah.
Again, they are who they are, they have their own authority, but you're talking about a partnership and a dialogue with another jurisdiction about.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to ask the question, I mean, do we want this policy to kind of apply everywhere? Or are we okay with it just saying commercial and residential? I don't know.
Well, I think Frank has a good question, which is, do we have the purview to do that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Well, TDM generally are more incentive-oriented, so.
Right, you could say promote TDM programs like commercial, residential, and institutional, and then you're simply saying, everybody who has cars, we'd like you to manage them somehow.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of getting at, why don't we just say implement transportation demand programs?
That's a great idea.
Won't just stop there.
And just period.
Okay.
Yeah.
That gives us the most flexibility.
Includes education.
Yeah.
Right. It would, yeah.
Yep.
And R just needs help in general.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay,
I do want to
thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
I do think that
Back up.
we want to keep art in, some concept of art in there, because I realized that after the last discussion, my whole point about the connection between sustainability and good land use planning went out of the sustainability discussion, and I just want to make sure that it's recognized within the sustainability discussion that is an important essential element. And so if it's here or if it's there, but the intersection between land use and transportation as a sustainability delivery vehicle.
We got it. Thank you.
So, is that everything you had for us, Joe?
We're done. We're done with this segment. You have a few other things. But we will come back at a date to be determined with another draft of this to reflect what we've heard from you tonight. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
So now is time for public comment. If there's anybody that wishes to provide comment on the comprehensive plan sustainability discussion we just had. Anybody wishes to provide comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment for tonight, and we're on to the director's report.
Well, the good news is I only have about 45 minutes prepared, so.
Perfect. I'll go home and watch.
And you're on TV, we can go home and watch you, right?
Everyone, they leave the room, I'll be the only one talking. We'll try to keep this quick, and if the staff and the consultants want to make their way out and do any debriefs, they're welcome to do that, because I think they know everything I'm talking about. One thing I would ask the commissioners, if you have not responded to Debbie on the 6 p.m. versus 6:30 p.m. Question, please do so we can get everybody's input into that and then make a decision on that. You know who you are if you haven't responded, so please do that.
And in light of that, Cameron, not to draw this out anymore, but just make note of the time, how long we've been here tonight. And I know 6 o'clock may be difficult for some of you, but if we can maybe take care of some of the kind of more administrative things and during that first 15 or 20 minutes while people are showing up, we can all get home a little bit earlier. Thank you.
We're also at some point going to be moving to a different venue because this room will be going through a remodel. As you can tell, we have some parts of our AV system that are working and other parts that really need a bit of a serious rehab. The timetable for that is still in flux, so I don't have dates to give you yet, but it looks like we'll be going over to the Maintenance and Operations Center, which is out on 244th at about, roughly northeast 16th or so. So more to come on that. It'll be a different feeling being out there, but we'll figure out a way for the commission to be video recorded and audio recorded and do the presentations, but it'll be a compact place for a month or two. The City Council did meet this last Tuesday. Simple meeting. As I mentioned, they actually had one of their shorter meetings. They finished at about 7:20. Their only action item was to hold a public hearing on the homeless encampment moratorium. As you recall, there's a moratorium right now because that moratorium was adopted by emergency ordinance. A public hearing was held last night after the fact. That's what state law requires. They did get similar comment to what you heard tonight. So not much else to say about the City Council since that's their only meeting since your last joint meeting with them outside of the City Council retreat, which is held in late February. And because this commission and the council and the staff and consultants have done all this really great work developing a working vision statement, all the input for that, this was an easier retreat for yours truly because we had less to do from the community development side there. So much of the council's discussion was focused on parks and recreation, open space, and those kinds of things. Retreat notes are being developed now. Those could be made available to you so you can see what was discussed there. As you heard earlier, they did talk about homeless encampments, and you have that policy direction in front of you. And then the last thing I'll mention is that looking at our calendar, which we haven't talked about much, we should take a little look at that. You've gotten through your sustainability stuff here tonight, which is great. We're scheduled at your March 20th meeting to again move into homeless encampments, keep going on that, and then have a work session on the environment and conservation element. One of the things I'll be talking about with staff after this meeting is how much time we think the next meeting on March 20th will need to be devoted to the homeless encampment issue. It took about an hour and a half tonight, and we'd assumed an hour. If we have a lot of public testimony, that means it may take longer that night. And so I want to make sure that if we do have something related to the comp plan on the 20th of March, that we actually have a meaningful time for it. So we'll talk about it at the staff level. We'll work with the chair and vice chair, but just a look ahead that it's possible that we will play a little bit further with the comp plan elements, and whether we have one of those on the March 20th or not, I think is a question mark right now. That may not be a problem in that we can push some of these out, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll be reporting to the City Council on Monday, March 17th on these additional scope of work items for the comp plan. And if we get many of them confirmed, and there are 4 proposed scope items that involve reasonably large-scale studies, which means consultant work, staff work, public outreach, environmental analysis, etc. Those will not just cost a few dollars, they'll command some time. And that will probably have a larger impact on the comp plan schedule by taking a bite out of the schedule and diverting resources off probably during spring and summer months, hopefully not too much into the fall. And so we'll have to see what that means in terms of your comp plan elements, because these are studies that affect the land use element, and of course the land use element touches, it's kind of a central hub element for the whole plan. So again, we'll work with the chair and vice chair, and I'll appreciate your patience as we go forward. The good news is that you will not be wanting for items to discuss, because we have the proverbial 10-pound potatoes and the 5-pound bag. After homeless encampments, you have tree retention code. After that, you're going to probably have marijuana code. You're going to have town center stuff. So there's a lot going on here, and so even if we had to take a few months hiatus from the comp plan or have a thinner schedule for the comp plan, there are other things to command the airtime that are priorities for the City Council. So that's my report and the calendar look ahead. Happy to answer any questions.
Just one. For the public comment for the homeless encampments, we tend to get a lot of very one-sided opinions, people that care to come and speak here. Is it possible we could extend formally an invitation to the Share Wheel Group and to Camp Unity as a organization to come and to let them know we're going to be doing this? I know that media connections with them is, it's not like you can't just put it in the paper and they're going to read it. I think that I'd like to see something a little bit more proactive.
I believe we have already let them know that. I think they have some limitations as to their capacity to participate in all these different city processes. As Tent City 4 was here, my experience was that the camp host, Mary Queen of Peace, and representatives from Tent City 4 did attend City Council meetings several times. So I'd expect them to participate in your part of the process as well, but we'll make sure that we reach out to them effectively and see if we can get them here. At least folks that probably are knowledgeable about their perspectives will be here that night as well.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else? Thank you for staying a little bit late and getting through the sustainability material.
If I can bring up just one item. King County Parks is going to be doing open houses over the next 2 weeks. It's on their King County Trails website. If you're interested in the Sammamish Trail, I encourage you to check it out and attend the meetings. There's four of them over the next 2 weeks.
Is this for phase 2?
Yes,
Phase 2 of the
phase
trail?
2A and B.
Okay. All right.
I also I attended a tour of some home-based businesses with city council members and chamber of commerce people yesterday or Monday. And it's very interesting, and I think that there's some really interesting perspectives when you talk to some of these home business people. So when we come to those things, I do some good stuff.
Did it include bedroom community?
No, but there's actually a little general store that one woman runs that sells like little groceries and
really?
It's called Accents, Etc. I believe it's called, and she sells wine, and it's like a little general store on her property. It's the cutest thing.
Wild.
Where's this? It's over on 244th. Do you remember? I don't remember. Do you know her name offhand? Yeah, I think it's called Accents, Etc. Sorry, I digress.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Anything else, anybody? All All right, motion to adjourn?
So moved. So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned at 9:26.
Yeah, she got this cute little store, and it's like